At that magic sunset hour, the whole world brooded. Obsidian cliffs no longer glittered, and the harshness of lava, pinnacle and sawtooth ridge was mellowed by fading gold. A violet haze enveloped the turbulent barrens that swooped downward and eastward like a crumbling into space. And beyond the gap, a mighty, rough-edged shadow was advancing across the valley floor. At a point where the canyon wall broke sharply into shadowed depths, two men sprawled, motionless as lizards on a heat-withered ledge. Their feet were to the sunset, their faces toward the gap. Rifles and canteens lay beside them. Many cigarette stubs littered the tough, wiry grass at their elbows. Invisible from below, they were studying a lone horseman approaching from the plains. Frail and tiny, this rider loomed, a fragment of life-threatening savage dimensions. Yet, through the crystal air, each detail about him was plain. His horse was black, clean-limbed, and muscular. He was traveling, heavy blanket roll, saddlebags, and rifle and scabbard. He sat the saddle easily, in seasoned fashion, molded to his mount. The sound of his progress echoed between the enclosing walls. "What do you make of him, Sid?" inquired the shorter of the two lookouts softly. The row-boned youth with the bristling jaw did not immediately reply. His eyes were glued to powerful field glasses. Through these he continued to study the horseman for a space. Then he laid them aside and took up his rifle. "Can't figure him. He ain't a peace officer," said he. "He'd know the pass was guarded, and he was signing his own death warrant. He ain't a cowhand looking for strays. Probably a stranger rushing in where the angels fear to tread. Either way, he slid a cartridge gently into the breech. We'll singe his whiskers. That's what we'll do." "How come you hog all the excitement?" accused the other, as Sid laid his rifle carefully along the ledge. "It ain't excitement," Sid reproved. "It's business. You're too doggone bloodthirsty. Will, we don't want this pilgrim's scalp, lest he plumb insists. Albert's squeamish about killings lately. Things are getting too hot." His sights were set for 500 yards. The stranger was less than half that distance away. He therefore aimed directly at the battered sombrero below and pulled the trigger. The crashing report echoed in the gorge, shuttled back from distant peaks. Sid glared through the thinning smoke. "Son of a gun," said he. "That slug didn't miss him 8 inches, and he never batted an eyelash. Didn't even look up and say, 'Bless us, and save us.'" "Probably figured it was a horsefly," said Will, chuckling. "They are bad in these parts," says he, yawning. "But what of it? It'll soon be sundown." "Yeah, he's a cool one, that Jasper." "Kick up some dust in front of him," Sid growled. "See if he'll laugh that off." Both rifles belched into the depths. Puffs of dust leaped up in the narrow trail, all but beneath the horse's nose. The spirited animal reared, plunging. The rider calmed him with a muttered word and a tightening of the reins, and proceeded as before. "He's one of them dummies," breathed Will in awe. "Blind, also, or maybe he's just plain loco. Drill him, Sid, shoot his horse. Then," he suggested, as Sid shook his head, scowling, "leave him afoot and he'll take the hint. Loco or not?" "No," said Sid. He eased back from the edge of space and motioned his lieutenant to follow. "We'll head him off up yonder at the bend. There's something about this Jasper that'll bear looking into. He's got some joker up his sleeve. Question is, what?" They retrieved their horses from a scrub pine thicket and descended into the upper canyon. Behind a huge shoulder of basalt that bulged above the trail, Sid loosened his gun in his holster and motioned Will back. The sound of the stranger's approach was close at hand. "I'll ride out casual," Sid whispered. "If shooting starts, hold him here until Albert comes. If he parleys, come out with your hand filled and we'll take him." All set, said Will. The stranger was slumped in the saddle, chin sunk on his chest, like one lost in thought. He looked up when Sid appeared around the corner and pushed back his sombrero with a careless gesture. Thus was revealed boyish lianjawed features that were oddly bleak. His big mouth, formed for laughing, was straight-lipped and grim. In build he was slender but wiry. Upon him, backed up by horse and equipment, was the nameless, seasoned air of one who has eaten much dust in his time and has ridden into many sundowns. Sid, reins held loosely in his left hand. The thumb of his right, hooked in his gun belt, was obviously blocking the trail. He broke off as a file of armed men rode around the bend. Something like a sigh of relief escaped him. Here's the chief. There were 6 or 7 in the bristling column. At its head rode a short, long-armed man with a seamed face and a ragged mustache that curved down to meet a lean, outthrust jaw. His eyes, as he drew nearer, were pale blue, unwinking, and cold as crumbs of glass. "What's this, Sid?" His voice was dry and brittle. "What we got here?" The briefness of Sid's reply, and the manner in which the others waited on their leader's every move, suggested a military discipline. "A pilgrim," said he, "who says he's looking for Albert." The little man turned his unwinking gaze upon the slender figure, as though to search out his innermost thoughts. "I'm Albert," said he, and it was plain, from the stir this admission caused among the hard-bitten ranks, that a species of verdict had been pronounced upon the stranger. "Who are you?" "A lone wolf," said the young man. "Looking for a roost?" Albert pierced him with another glance, then reined away. At his gesture, each horseman pivoted, heading for the bend. Wolf, said Albert. "Horse him up to the bullpen, boys. We'll examine his teeth." There were 10 horsemen, including the prisoner, who rounded the bend. Beyond was revealed a larger group waiting, 11 or 12, perhaps more. It was hard to count noses as they milled and jostled, swinging around at Albert's gesture. This cavalcade strung out in single file, mounting the trail into the higher barrens. If the stranger was surprised at these numbers, his bearing gave no hint of it. He sat the saddle in indifferent pose, his cigarette hanging from careless lips. The trail was wider here. Albert rode beside him. Sid and Will brought up the rear. Heading the column was a slender youth wearing a pearl-gray sombrero. This one did not look back. Nor did the others. No sound broke the stillness but the creaking of leather and the harsh clanging of steel on stone. Beyond the hogback that ended the narrowing canyon, a small amphitheater bounded by unscalable cliffs opened up beside the trail. It was perhaps 30 yards across, a pocket, a hole in the wall. Into it the column turned, following the slender file leader, except that youth, who withdrew into the background and remained in the saddle, chin cupped in hand, all dismounted, leaving the horses in an irregular semicircle, reins trailing. The prisoner dismounted with the others and looked about him. Here, it was plain, was no permanent camp, but a temporary rendezvous. Ancient embers littered the sandy floor. Ancient sign told of cattle and horses having been quartered here often. It was a remote spot, sheltered from wind and storm, easily guarded. As a lesser semicircle within the line of horses, Albert's followers grouped, shoulder to shoulder. It was revealed now that there were 23 in all, including the silent youth in the background. The latter's features, beneath the shadow of his sombrero, appeared to be smooth-cheeked, almost effeminate. Spiritually, as in the flesh, he held himself aloof. Of the others, some were young, like Sid and Will. Some, like Albert, were seamed of feature and grizzled of hair. A few were neat in appearance and stood erect with a swaggering semblance of pride. Mostly they were unshaved, slovenly, and yellow-fanged. Upon all, of differing types and calibers, was the stamp of reckless and lawless men. Albert motioned the prisoner forward. In the silence that had fallen upon the cleft, his voice was like the rasping of dried leaves. "Fellow," said he, "you may have faced courts before. Most of us have. There'll be no lawyers here, no tomfoolery. There's no bail nor hope of appeal. You ready for straight talk?" "Shoot," said the young man. "You've seen me?" said Albert. "You've seen these fellows? You could pick us out of a lineup, which means you've crossed a threshold and can't turn back. You savvy that, "Sure," said the young fellow. He added, "I've crossed worse thresholds." "Understand, also, that I'm a judge of men," said Albert in his unemotional way. "I read brands. I haven't figured you yet. I will, when we begin to talk. On what you say, and how you say it, rests the 1 chance in 10 you've got of leaving this hole alive. And if you leave," he jerked a thumb toward the pinnacles, "you go west, not east. Get me?" "Gotcha," the fellow nodded. "Sid?" The latter stepped forward. "Let's hear your end of it." "He come up the canyon. Right and easy," said Sid. "I sent a slug past his ear. He never batted an eye. Both of us fired in front of him. No result. I figured maybe he was a friend of yours. So me and Will wait," said Albert. He made no sign. "No sign," said Sid. "Rode like a wooden engine. We met him at the bend. He claimed he wanted to talk to you. Named your name. So we took his guns. Then you come at all?" "Only this," said Sid. "For a minute, it looked like we'd have to down him to get his guns. Then he changed his mind. Said something or other about aimin' to cash a shunin'. But what of it? That's all." Albert waved him back. He stepped closer to the youth. All right, fella, let's have it. What's your name? Campbell. Rip Campbell? Where you from? The valley. Riding a bar X-horse? Said Albert, indicating the black. Ya hands are hands of a fellow who works. You're on the bar X payroll? No, said R.I.P. I worked my own spread. I got a quarter across the valley. On Wolf Creek. That is, he amended, I had until this morning. Now the bank's got it. Ever get into any trouble? Plenty no wisecracks, said Albert. Irritation did not show in his voice. In some nameless manner, its very dryness breathed of menace. I mean trouble with the law. No, said Rip. Why, then, said Albert, did you come riding with a full outfit? Why did you push on when rifle slugs told you to stop? Why did you ask for me? I'll tell you why, said Rip. He cast down his cigarette and ground it beneath his heel. It was the first time he had shown emotion of any character. He spoke through lips that parted grudgingly. Because I'm a failure down in the valley. At honest work. Because my own kind threw me out. They're not my kind. I didn't fit in. I'll never fit in. I'm branded. My father was a gunman and killer. Water seeks its own level. That's what folks say. I could go on beating my head against a stone wall, or I could quit and head for the barrens. I'd done so today, turned my back on the Valley End Life-on Road to Dead Man's Trail, so folks would know they were right, and laugh. He was breathing heavily. Is that enough? No, said Albert. His hard eyes did not waver in their unwinking scrutiny. You've got to have the whole story. Rip had regained his composure. He grinned. Okay, I'll tell it once. No more. If you've got tears to shed, shed 'em now. I had a little homestead over yonder. A shack, a spring, and a jag of beef. There was good foundation stock in that beef. The spring was the shack was a good shack. Home you savvy. Climbing roses round the door. Never mind the trimmings, cut in Albert. It was a good spread. What happened to it? I lost it, said Rip. I needed money. It was when I went out borrowing that I found out where I stood in that man-s country. I thought folks had forgotten the strain that was in me, the wild strain. I'd worked hard all my life, you savvy. Shot square, but they hadn't forgotten. I wasn't a good risk. I'd break out some time like a rash. Sure, they had alibis for not backing my play. Hard times falling, beef market, the baby had measles, all that plain and fancy horseradish. But underneath was the old hand of steel. So I went to the banker. He was happy to oblige. Not as a banker. Oh, my, no. I wasn't a good risk. But as an individual, he'd call my bluff. At 10%. Plus a confidential bonus. Plus a chattel mortgage listing everything but my eye teeth. And you lost the works. Albert nodded. The banker wiped you out. Then what? Then, said Rip, I went into a huddle with myself. Cold turkey. I'd worked hard ever since I'd got my growth. I'd lost my stake in a single play. I'd shot square with the world all the while, hoping in my bleary-eyed fashion that I was gaining credit. Therefore, that was a delusion also. I could do it all, again neat, dust and sweat, make a stake, run a bluff as a stalwart citizen and get nowhere. How buck a combination like that? What's it all about? Who says so? And why? The answers to those questions is why I'm here. There's nothing mysterious about it. Nothing out of the way. Rip Campbell, who'd been grazing under false pretenses in them peaceful pastures, has done turned back to the wild bunch. Albert eyed him unwinkingly for a space. Plain to those who watched, who knew Albert, was the fact that the acid test was being applied to the newcomer's story. You say your father was a gunman and killer? Did he, to your knowledge, ever circulate up in the horse heaven country, under the name of Long Chance Caruthers? My father, said the youth, is out of the picture. Let his bones rest. The name is Campbell. The abrupt reply did not seem to antagonize Albert. When you came up the trail, why did you ask for me by name? Who told you I was here? It's been rumored in the valley for months, said R.E.P. And the talk about impeaching the sheriff for letting this den of reptiles flourish up in the Pinos. It's been whispered that Albert himself was on the job, the fire-spitting desperado in person. HMMS, said Albert, and you had a friendly feeling for this bold, bad outlaw. You admire him and ache to throw in with him? Is that it? Rip grinned a bitter grin. No, he said. I wouldn't kid you, Albert. I don't crave to throw in with you. I don't admire the color of your eyes, nor the trails you've blazed. But if I'm forced into the wild bunch, where I belong, I'll do it right. It isn't the prospect of associating with you and your uncurried wolves that fetched me here. It's this. An army is gathering in the valley. A vigilante committee of short-tempered and long-suffering citizens who will wipe out this rattlesnakes. Reunion in a hurry. Dust will mill plenty. When it's settled, there won't be anything left up here in the pinnacles but a flock of new graves. That's the action I crave, and the trail I took. Bah, said Albert. He shot a quick glance at his cohorts. Who had stirred uneasily at the blunt picture of the retribution gathering in the plains? We could stand off an army in a showdown. We could thumb our noses in their faces and sit tight. We'll name our own deal and see it through. When the time comes, and not before, we'll cash our chips and get out of the game. Let them prowl over cold trails. We'll be gone plenty far with heavy winnings. He broke off abruptly. It was the first time he had shown anger. It was not directed so much at Rip as to the thought he had put into words. And as for you, Campbell, we'll pass on you, pronto. Joe! He gestured to the mounted youth in the background. You've been listening to this pilgrim. He's hard. He doesn't give a damn whether school keeps or not. Question is, will he be useful? Let's have your hunch. The horseman had been pushing forward during this speech. Rip saw, to his astonishment, that here was no boy, as he had supposed, but a Wumuna girl, rather cool and poised. Unemotional, so it seemed. As Albert himself, she did not dismount. She pulled up beside Albert and resumed her former pose, chin cupped in hand. She looked down at Rip through long-lashed hazel eyes whose air of detachment was sexless and uncompromising. Meeting her searching scrutiny, Rip was also aware of Albert's reptilian gaze, studying them both with jealous and hawk-like intentness. Her interrogation was brief but explicit. It speedily became evident that her mental processes were more keen than those of Albert himself. "Cowboy," said she, "you're attempting to crash into a closed corporation. You're uninvited. The burden of proof is on you. We can use men who know guns, horses, and hard trails. But on the trails we ride, we've got to know each other better than most brothers are known to each other. You understand that, eh?" "If that's an apology," said Rip, "let it pass." "It's no apology," said the girl shortly. "We've got to know where you stand. You might be a peace officer." "You know, I might, at that," Rip agreed. "And if you're not a peace officer, your motives for leaving the valley, as you've announced them, don't pass muster with me." For instance, her long-lashed gaze swept him from head to foot. "You're young, you're healthy and strong. You're of the dominant type, reckless, fiery, and spirited." "Yes," she nodded approvingly. "And handsome?" "Thank you," said Rip. "I could judge the good points of a horse," she retorted, her lips curling, with equal skill, and as impersonally. "The point I was approaching is this. The loss of your homestead was a financial setback. The distrust of your neighbors, in spite of your square shooting and hard work, was a blow to your pride. But these are picayune matters. After all, to one who is young and vigorous, and before whom the world is outspread like a smiling range, somewhere else there's plenty of room. New prospects, new friends and neighbors who know nothing of your past or your father's sins. Isn't it strange, then, in fact, that you should put all your chances for life and the pursuit of happiness behind you and ride up dead man's trail? No more strange," Rip retorted, "than to hear such sentiments from a girl like you." He was unsmiling now, more guarded, like a skilled poker player facing an adversary of caliber. "Unbelievable or not, lady, you're arguing with facts. I've put the past behind me. I'm here, and that's final." "True," she agreed. "But why? Let's probe a little deeper. There's only one force that could send a man of your type deliberately into the wild bunch. It isn't the opinion of neighbors. It isn't the loss of a homestead. It's something more damaging to the egotism and self-esteem that men call pride. Tell me." She did not appear to smile, but her firm cheeks dimpled a little. "Was she beautiful? You loved her? Bagosh, and she did you dirt. Is that it?" A dark flush rose to the roots of Rip's tawny hair. His jaw set. "This business," said he, "has gone far enough. My personal and private affairs will add no chips to this game. I've told my story. You can take it or leave it." She was beautiful. Then, and life, of course, wasn't worth living anymore, she said, nodding. "It would be a grand gesture to ride up into the badlands like a lone wolf. You'd probably be shot at the gap, but what of it? Perhaps, when they brought in your bullet-riddled body, folks would shake their heads and feel sorry they'd talked about you like that. She might shed a tear or two, because she'd driven you to it, and you so young. A cowboy?" Rip eyed her venomously, with the flushed and badgered air of a small boy facing a tormentor beyond his power to reach. "All of which," she continued, "is fine as far as it goes. Some of these men have less excuse than that for being here. Some have no excuse at all. Still, they're fair to medium outlaws. Mostly, and all of them will hang, someday, as all good outlaws should." "Easy on that," Girl Albert warned. "This pilgrim doesn't know you're joking. And this is no time for wise. The point is," she continued, addressing RIP, "you've blazed no trails. Thus far, you've been bad only in imagination. You're neither fish, flesh, nor fowl. What guarantee have we that you'll stay put?" "You haven't any?" said Rip shortly. "I'm offering none. If my being here doesn't speak for itself, I'm through." What I crave action on is this. How long you going to keep up this tomfoolery? The girl looked at him steadily for a space, while the shadowed cleft grew still. Albert appeared to be awaiting her verdict. Then she straightened in the saddle. The tomfoolery, said she, is over. You're not a peace officer. No peace officer rides into certain death and gives up his guns without a struggle. You're not a spy. The usefulness of a spy depends upon his returning with useful information alive. Your story, as much as you've admitted, rings true. You've turned your back on the valley. You've got this far up Dead Man's Trail. But this, her voice was cold, is as far as you'll get. Your trail ends here. To Albert, she said briefly, turning away. The works. She leaned down to whisper in the outlaw's ear. Something like a sigh escaped the intent ranks. There was a shuffling of feet and creaking of harness as they shifted position. More than one hand fumbled furtively for the makings as Albert motioned Rip forward and took his rifle. You'll stand over yonder, Campbell? He jerked a thumb toward the opposite wall. What's this? Said Rip, again cool and composed. Curtains, curtains, said Albert. You're not wanted here, but having come this far, you can't go back to the valley alive. Wipe that grin off your face. Campbell, if you've ever met up with a solemn occasion in your life, this is it. Nevertheless, said Rip, taking up his stand, back to the wall, grinning's my privilege, and I'm clinging to it regardless of what is going to happen. Take off your hat, said Albert, his voice brittle. The light's none too good. Rip removed his sombrero and cast it aside. The clicking of Albert's rifle as he slid a cartridge home re-echoed as in a vault. Doggone, said Rip plaintively, this is a pinionty way to pass out. I wish I'd kept my guns. Any last word? Questioned Albert. Take care of my horse, said Rip. He's ace. Watch the frog on the off forefoot. It's too soft. Subject to stone bruise. Albert nodded. Nothing else. Nothing else. Now wait a second, Chief. The youth stepped forth from the ranks of spectators, face glistening. This ain't right. I ain't squeamish about mowing a gent down in a freak for all, but somehow or another, in cold blood this away Albert, his rifle half raised to his shoulder, merely turned to look the mutinous one full in the face. The latter held his ground for a long moment. No others stepped forth to join him. He retreated, cursing, and pulled his sombrero lower over his eyes. Methodically, Albert turned back to the business in hand. He took deliberate aim, squinting down the sights. It was gloomy in the cleft, but not too dark for close shooting. Rip stood erect, his gaze fixed upon a lone star that twinkled high above the iron peaks. The rifle roared. The echoes shuttled from distant crags. From the weak-kneed youth who had raised his voice in protests came a profane cry of surprise. The prisoner had not fallen. He still stood. He raised his hand slowly, as in a dream, and touched his face. His exploring fingertips were red, but this superficial scratch on his cheek had not been caused by the bullet. Flattening against the wall beside him, the slug had showered him with splintered rock. You're not running a bluff, then, said Albert dryly. No gent with a joker up his sleeve could play it to the finish like that. Campbell, you're elected. Show, said Rip in a shaken voice. Now there was a grandstand play. Grin, Cowboy, said the girl, and as for you, Tonto Albert turned himself about waspishly. How long is it going to take you, fuzz-faced yearlings, to learn to back my play blind? Where's that chicken-livered young rooster who spoke out of turn? But the culprit, head hanging and face crimson, slunk still farther into the background. Let's go, said Albert. His gesture closed the incident. You, Bull and Hondo, take the post at the gap. Turn all strays back, without exception. Sid and Will did okay to let this pilgrim in, but the trail's closed now. This army's gained its last recruit. All right, men to the camp. Faded lights still clung to the higher levels, but gorges were choked in shadow. Many matches glowed behind cupped hands as the long column rode westward into the barrens. Sparks trailed from reckless lips and steel-shod hoofs. The girl was far ahead on the undulating line. Strange faces were ahead of Rip and to the rear. The last rider was Albert Padot. He was tightening his hold on life. Moment by moment, Rip rode through a species of unreality. Having girded his spirit against the final and grim event, it was hard to lay his armor aside. Yet, riding as one awakening from a dream, he was conscious of his These were unreal, fantastic, a world of savage dimensions. Mighty gorges forked to right and left. Jagged rims were outlined against the strengthening stars. The trail, as a trail, forked, thinned, and was lost, but always the troop bore toward the setting sun. Pull up, Campbell, came Albert's dry voice at his elbow. The latter had drawn abreast, unnoticed. Under cover of the noise in the rocky defile, the riders behind them passed by. The head of the column, having crossed the crumbled moraine upon which the pair stood, was bearing directly upon a sheer, rugged wall. Yet as Rip watched, the riders were swallowed up one by one. He saw then that a vertical, shadow-choked crevasse, which appeared to be of no depth, but which was in reality wide enough for the passage of a mounted man, led deep into the mighty wall. "When you enter there," said Albert, "there's no returning. If you understand me, Campbell." "Got you," said Rip. "And before you enter," continued the outlaw, "there's a detail or two to be understood. You'll see action in plenty on this trail. Make no mistake about that. But we proceed according to a well-planned campaign. I give the orders. You follow them to the letter. You ride where I say to ride. And when? You do what I say to do, and how. Got that?" Rip nodded. "The split," said Albert, "is 1/3 to me in the balance share and share alike. Until after a forthcoming deal, which you'll hear referred to as the big job, I hold the loot. I'm the keeper of the keys, the banker, the custodian of the jackpot. It avoids argument. It holds the group together. Any objection?" "No objection," said R.I.P. "There's one more detail," said Albert. "It concerns Joe. 3 men have been buried since she joined us. They were all young. They were all careless of the hereafter. I found it necessary to eliminate them because—" "Not interested," Rip interrupted. "Nevertheless," said Albert, "flesh is frail. You may wake up some bright morning with a changed outlook. If so, recall what I've told you. And I'm telling you," said Rip with a bitter smile, "that you don't have to post any notice of the crossroads for me. There's a number of things I'm not interested in. At the end of the list is women." The noisy progress of the last of the column had died in the crevasse. Albert sat for a space like one lost in thought, but Rip felt his emotionless gaze upon him. All about them, as their horses stood statuesque, was the vast and imposing silence of the peaks. "Campbell," said Albert abruptly, "we're alone now. You left a girl down yonder?" "Yes," said Rip. "You hanker to go back to her?" "No. You rode up the trail, hoping you'd be dropped at the gap." "Not exactly," said Rip. "I took a chance that they wouldn't drop me cold, that I could shoot it out. If I lost, what of it? And you figured you still had a chance when your back was to the wall." "No," said Rip. "When you said curtains, I thought you meant it. It was a good bluff." "Albert?" The reply seemed to please the outlaw. Some of his aloofness thawed. "As a matter of fact," said he dryly, "it was a mighty thin margin that made it a bluff, Rip. But Joe put a thought in my head. You'll be useful on the big job." It was the second time the mysterious forthcoming campaign had been suggested. Rip expected him to enlarge upon it. Instead, Albert turned abruptly to another subject. "Rip, did your father ever mention an old pal named Shorty DeVore, or another old pal named King Colton?" Rip stiffened a little in the saddle. "We're alone," Albert reminded him. "He didn't discuss the past with me much," said Rip. "I've heard those names. I knew you as soon as I looked into your face," said Albert. "You have Longchance's eyes." And smile. The same cold nerve in a showdown. "Who are you, then?" said Rip. "I'm Albert," said the other dryly. "I was Shorty DeVore. The records say he was dead and buried up in the Coeur d'Alene. Let his record rest with him. Albert has blazed his own trails." The hackles rose on Rip's neck. It was like facing one risen from the grave. He had assumed since childhood, as had the world for more than a decade, that with his father's death, the last of the notorious trio had passed on into the limbo of frontier legend. The legend itself was lurid and undying. Carruthers, Colton, and Dever, so old-timers affirmed, had comprised a pat hand in any game and in many a showdown long chance. The cold-eyed, smiling gunman with a notoriously big heart, King Colton, who carried himself like a cavalier of less swashbuckling, days genteel, polished, and aloof, even when dealing from the bottom of a deck or reaching for a 10-inch bowie. Shorty DeVore, the most dangerous of the trio, the least condoned, cold, calculating, fearless, with the emotionless savagery of a copperhead. Longchance was gone. King Colton, too, in his debonair fashion, had stridden on into the shadows. Only Shorty, the reptilian, yet lived. "Why tell me this?" demanded Rip. "Why?" echoed the other softly. "I'll tell you why. I'm not superstitious, Rip. I don't believe in signs, omens, fate, or the hereafter, but there's a design here. Because look, Joe's name is Josephine Colton, King Colton's daughter, the same," said Albert. "His pride, his pearl, his treasure, which as I suggested before is now under my protection." Bryant permitted himself a cynical grin, but said nothing. "Joe has already proved her caliber," continued Albert. "She and I work hand in glove now. Measure the stars. You're like Longchance, and the 3 of us can make big medicine. We've got a good gang as far as gunfighting and hard riding goes. Outside of that, they're cattle. They'll be useful up to the big job. They'll further, think it over." He eyed Rip fixedly, significantly, then turned away. "I'll go first. It'll give your horse confidence. It's a rough trail in the dark. He mounted forthwith into the crevasse. Rip followed at his heels. At the edge of the engulfing blackness, he twisted in the saddle to look back. For both concealment and defense, the inner stronghold of the outlaw band, of which this was obviously the entrance, was well nigh perfect. At 50 paces distant across the moraine, the crevasse would seem to be impassable to mounted men. The broken fragments of the moraine itself, shifting underfoot, left no trail. If the right crevassage was but one of a dozen, cleaving the mighty wall, were discovered, a lone guard, with plenty of ammunition, could stand off an army. Looking up, he glimpsed a motionless figure in silhouette against the stars. He was facing eastward toward the downsloping barrens, like an eagle looking forth from his eyrie. His sombrero shifted briefly as he peered down at the riders in the depths. His cigarette glowed, otherwise he might have been carved from the shoulder of rock against which he leaned. Rip had assumed, insofar as he had attempted to visualize the outlaw's retreat, that it would be a mere segment of bleak canyon, similar to the pocket where he had faced Albert's rifle. Instead, to his surprise, a considerable valley opened up beyond the cleft. It was a hole in the wall, but on a much larger scale than he had expected. A green and sheltered oasis, hidden in the vastness of the barrens. There was a sizable flat, dark with scattered clumps of pine, watered by a meandering creek that glittered with reflected stars. Directly across from the point where he stood was another break in the towering ramparts that hemmed in the huge pocket. It was a narrow gorge, cut through the ancient crater rim by centuries of erosion. From this came the distant murmur of a hidden waterfall. An air of tranquility lay upon the scene, as upon a snug mountain homestead at twilight. Horses were grazing in the open. A calf bawled and a cow muttered in reply. The grunting of hogs came from a hidden pen. Rude corrals were visible through the gloom. Flanking these corrals, at the foot of the wall, were several log cabins in an irregular row. From these rude dwellings emanated certain sounds significant of a social order, flourishing doggedly beyond the pale. A noisy brawl was in progress in one cabin. In another, a guitar twanged mournfully. There was a murmur of voices, deep-toned, interspersed with harsh laughter. Also, from cabins far down the line, came unmistakable feminine tones, raised above the clatter of pots and pans. And the wailing of fretful children. "Women folks?" questioned Rip incredulously. "Why not?" said Albert. 3 or 4 of the fellows were family men. When they turned bad, their women stayed by them. I found them here when I moved in and took command. I let them stay. The children are a nuisance. The women snivel. But in the main, it's good business. Even the young bucks like to see a touch of domestic life. It makes them think we've set up something permanent. The women, such as they are company for Joe. They turned their horses loose to graze. Rip unrolled his blankets in an empty bunk in a large cabin that comprised the bachelor headquarters of the crew. His rifle and sidearms had been returned to him. He hung these on adjacent pegs, disposed his equipment to his liking, stretched himself out, and rolled a cigarette. It was like military barracks. Cigarette smoke hung from the blackened rafters overhead. Men lolled in bunks, yawning. Stud and drop poker battles waged at tables in the center of the big room. Cribbage addicts muttered, heads together. From the conversation about him, Rip learned much of the camp routine. It, too, was military in character, following set rules. The unmarried men ate at the cook shack. Next in line to the north, the kitchen was presided over by Grattan's widow. Grattan himself, it appeared, having cashed in at some past imbroglio, known as the Two Forks job. The girl, Jo, was quartered with the widow. They occupied a choice cabin overlooking the flats. It had a small garden with flowers in it. Albert occupied the cabin at the end of the line to the south. Albert ruled. Rip gathered, with an iron hand. Complaints were loud among the rank and file, according to the way of active and reckless men. These concerned the food, the night guard, the way certain jobs had been handled, the mystery that surrounded the forthcoming big job. But through it all, it was plain that Albert's dominance was unquestioned, that each man of the crew was prepared to follow him blindly. Guarded references to the girl, Jo, were significant of this dominance. There were those among the reckless ranks who would have laughed at any odds, faced death without a quiver, and for stakes less than a smile. Even in the eyes of these, it was plain, the girl was unattainable, unapproachable beyond their horizon. She was, so their manner indicated, Albert's property, his undivided spoils. Rip slept soundly that night. When the lights went out and the camp grew still, physical and spiritual exhaustion claimed him. He had no time to speculate through quiet hours on the events and crossroads just past, or to appraise the future. He tried to ask himself certain questions. The answers eluded him. The past and future were vague, remote. He rode between them, in gathering darkness. So into an undrimming void, horsemen came and went in the small hours. Yawning guards stumbled in, and grumbling reliefs departed. A rooster crowed. From across the flats came a strengthening chorus of songbirds. It was still early in the morning, but broad daylight, when a hand shook his shoulder. He looked up. Nevada, a slender, silent youth, spoke tersely. "The chief wants you. Dress for the trail. Bring your guns. Leave your rifle." When Rip stepped down from the threshold, Albert was waiting. The towering Sid loomed at his side. 4 saddled horses stood nearby, reins trailing. Albert uttered no word of greeting. His pale blue eyes inspected Rip's face briefly, impersonally, flicked down to his gun belt and spurs. "Campbell," said he, "you're a new recruit. I've got a job for you." "Shoot," said Rip. "You'll breakfast at the cook shack," Albert directed. "It's ready for you. Eat hearty, because it's a long haul. You won't be back until after sundown. You'll ride with Sid. 2 more will meet you at an appointed place. Sid will give you the layout later on. 3 old hands will be with you. You understand? Sid's in charge." Got it, said R.I.P. "Let's go. Sid." He noted for the first time, as Albert turned away, that the outlaw leader walked with a slight limp. Sid ate with prodigious appetite at the cook shack, Rip more sparingly. With the latter, it was a mechanical process induced by Albert's warning that a long haul lay ahead. Save for the widow Grattan, who ministered to their wants in silence. The 2 were alone in the long mess room. "Where are we heading for?" Rip questioned, midway through the meal. "Tell you later," Sid replied. The widow was a large, blonde woman, with vestiges of former comeliness. Her plump, somewhat stolid features were deeply scored, her eyes heavy with grief. She evinced no curiosity concerning R.I.P., who was a stranger. They came, they went. So her bearing proclaimed. And what of it? But once, through the open door that led into the kitchen, he found her covertly studying him. He thought he caught a hint of pity in her gaze, a species of vague, helpless compassion. At the rear of the kitchen was a single window. Through this, dallying over his coffee, Rip could see a small cabin higher on the slope. Only a segment of it was visible, a patch of flowers at the threshold and the doorway itself. In this doorway, the girl, Jo, stood in pensive pose, her cheek against the frame, looking forth across the flats. Her head was bare, her dark, luxuriant hair massed in shapely confusion. Upon her, as upon the cabin, was some of the reflected glory of the strengthening dawn. Sid saw her, too. He eyed her fixedly as he ate, peering up through shaggy brows. "A picture," said Rip. He attempted a jocularity he did not feel. Who dealt Albert a hand like that? Beneath the table, Sid's knees pressed warningly against his. Rip recalled then that the cabin was the widow Grattan, and that the latter, from the kitchen, was doubtless listening to their every word that was being said. They rode up to the cleft, Sid in the lead. As they threaded that rough-hewn corridor, Rip saw that considerable work had been done to make it passable to mounted men. Huge fragments had been moved aside, barriers blasted away. Handholds had been cut in the vertical face of the crevasse, leading up to the lookout's perch. "Good hunting," remarked the latter, chuckling and grinning down upon them. "Don't take any brass nickels. See you later, maybe." "Don't forget your knitting," retorted Sid. "Save some of your strength to fight off horseflies. Keep the eggs warm." Rip discovered later that the lookout's post was referred to by the younger members of the crew as the cuckoo's nest, because no armed force had ever stormed the retreat. And action at this point was nil. It was a chore, irksome to restless and energetic men. Jovial interchanges were invariable between the sentry and those who rode forth. The reckless banter of those who may not again meet sundown together. The lookouts at the gap were invisible from below, yet Rip knew that their eyes were upon them as they passed through. They rode forth from the shadows and so into the brilliance of sunrise upon the sleeping valley. At Sid's gesture, they pulled to the left, threading the chaparral and stunted juniper of the sun-drenched slope. They did not descend to the valley floor. They mounted higher, skirting the edge of the barrens, bearing northward. Sid avoided open spaces as much as possible, selecting, with instinctive caution, dry washes and boulder-strewn arroyos that roughly followed their course. At midday they watered their horses at a mountain spring, from which a rivulet chuckled down into a sheltered cove where the ancient buildings of a homestead nestled. Sid drew forth a roughly drawn map, studied it, scowling, and squinted at the sun. Ripped his cigarette, hanging motionless, looked forth through narrow-lidded, brooding eyes upon the sun-drenched range. "Cowboy," said Sid abruptly, "we're here." He jerked a thumb toward the homestead below. "But job's down yonder." HMM said, "That Chin-Whisker Ranch looks like a sheep outfit to me. Be stealing a couple lambs?" "No," said Sid. "It's heftier than that. But it ought to be just as easy. 3 or 4 of the fellows that ain't known, you savvy, are circulating continuous in the valley. They keep their ears to the ground and their noses upwind and report world affairs to the chief. From what they tell us, Down yonder is a citizen named Bodini, an uncombed sheep fancier who plays a lone hand. This Bodini person just last week sold a band of muttons to the packing trust. For them blatting half-wits he received the sum of 3,000 smackers, ironmen, simoleons, coin of the realm. Being as distrustful of the world as a wall-eyed carp and a hostroff, he's got it salted somewheres on the premises. That's the little jackpot we're after. Fine, said Rip, his lip curling. Great, so that's the brand of action. 2 salty gents, loaded to the eye-teeth with artillery, have been heading for since sunup, calling on an unsuspecting sheep herder, euchering him out of a stake it's taken him years to accumulate. Now there's a trailblazing enterprise, and no mistake. There'll be 4 of us. The boss believes in playing it safe, said Sid. 2 more came over the ridge trail and are waiting down below. Get a hold of yourself, Campbell. Come down out of the clouds. It's shekels we're after, not noble, uplifting adventure. A roll like this doesn't grow on bushes. Bah, said Rip. Let's go. They descended the slope under the cover of a heavy stand of jack pine. Dilapidated outbuildings could be glimpsed through the trees. A windmill creaked. The stench of sheep grew plainer on the still air. A snake rail fence barred their path. They skirted this, bearing eastward. From a clump of junipers, within sight of the rambling barn and cabin beyond, 2 horsemen emerged and reined up, waiting. One of these was Nevada. The other, to Rip's astonishment, was the girl, Joe. Some nameless signal passed between Nevada and Sid. A raised eyebrow, an all but imperceptible nod. What this communication meant, Rip neither knew nor cared. He looked the girl full in the face. She, too, was looking at him, and he caught an expression in her long-lashed eyes that amazed and troubled him. It was strained, questioning, almost desperate. Yet, when she spoke, her mocking tones gave the lie to what he had glimpsed. Well, Jesse James, said she. You're here, eh? Ready for the slaughter? And how? Cut in Sid. Nevada, what's the dough? He's been working on the hog pen, said the still-faced Nevada. He cut back to the shack a minute ago, probably for fodder. Smoke's cumin out of the chimney. Nobody else on the premises. Fine, said Sid. Made to order. We'll ride up in a bunch, cashew, like we was drifting through. You and Joe up front, Nevada. Me and Rip follow. Okay? Okay, said Nevada. They came to a sagging gate. Nevada leaned from the saddle and swung it open. As its hinges squeaked raucously, 2 short-tailed shepherd dogs burst forth from the cabin with a furious barking. On their heels appeared an ancient and exceedingly shaggy person, hairy as the dogs themselves, a rifle in his hand. He eyed the quartet fixedly, bearded jaw outless. Then, seeing the girl, his rifle lowered. He turned, leaned the weapon against the doorframe, and stepped down to meet them, hitching up his ragged jeans with a self-conscious gesture. Draw when we draw. Rip, Sid commanded from the corner of his mouth. Shoot if we have to down him. Otherwise, stay put and watch how it's done. The dogs rushed upon them, snarling and snapping. This show of belligerence faded instantly at a curt word from the sheepman. They turned away and stood in the shade, tongues lolling. Howdy, said Nevadanized Day. The ancient one nodded. His round eyes, like shy forest pools surrounded by thick underbrush, beamed bashfully upon the girl. We're from the Lazy Z, continued Nevada, jerking his thumb toward the north. Looking up strays in the pinnacles. And, brother, was it hot? He mopped his brow. Got any drinking water? Sure, said the other, his first suspicions allayed. He writhed with embarrassment. Over to the pump. Wait, I'll get you the dipper. Never mind the dipper, said Nevada without change of tone. Reach for the sky, Bodini. Don't move. Half turned toward the water bucket on an adjacent bench. The sheepman halted, transfixed. Horror succeeded astonishment as his eyes looked into the muzzles of 2 weapons. The girl reined a little back. Rip sat immobile, disdaining to draw his gun. Belatedly, the ancient one grasped the grim import of the moment. His glance darted toward his rifle. But Sid's horse danced between. And Sid slid to the ground, a hackamore in his hand. Hold it, said he tersely. With an expert motion he looped the rope over the upraised wrists, dragged them down, and trussed them securely. The dogs leaped suddenly from the shadow, snarling, a hideous menace. Sid kicked at them, cursing. When they returned to the attack, he leveled his weapon upon them. Don't shoot, pleaded the ancient one. Please, mister, they're the best dogs in the county. Down, Buster, back, Sandy. The dogs obeyed, but they circled uneasily in the background, hackles erect. Sid motioned with his gun toward the cabin. Inside, old-timer, he ordered. Don't stand there wheezing. Never mind them questions. You'll find out pronto what it's all about. The interior of the cabin, by contrast to its shaggy owner and the dilapidated homestead surrounding it, was neat, well kept, spotlessly clean. No ashes littered the hearth. The bunk was made up with military precision. Dishes shone on oilcloth-covered shelves. Beside the window was a rawhide mushed chair. Sid and Nevada seated their prisoner upon it, bound his arms to its back and his ankles to the legs. Then they stood back and faced him. Bodini said, "Sid, where you got it hid?" Rip and the girl had entered. They stood side by side near the door. The Ancient One peered at the girl with a species of awe, more intently at Rip. Then he looked up doggedly at his inquisitors. "Got what hid?" he countered. "No stalling, Bodini," said Nevada. "Talk fast. This short-tempered outfit won't stand for nonsense. You sold your sheep last week. You got 3,004 M. You didn't put it in the bank at Lodgepole. You brought it to the ranch. A roll of big bills. Where's that roll?" The Ancient One licked his lips. "I paid it out," he said. "It's gone. I owed over to the bank. And at the grocery store, they was a mortgage due." "You're lying," said Nevada gently. "Talk to him." "Sid Bodini," said Sid, "unfolds your ears. You brought that roll here? You ain't been off the place since? You got it hid. In the shack? In a hollow stump. Buried in the garden. We ain't looking for it. You're telling us, and pretty quick, or there's one bewhiskered sheep fancier is sprinting pronto across the Jordan." "Savvy be danged if I do," said the Ancient One. He burst forth suddenly. "It's mine. I worked for it, sweated and starved. It's honest money. I've done right by folks. I've paid my bills. I earned it, every cent of it. Nobody's going to take it from me. It's mine. I tell you." Sid hooked his toe under the first round of the chair, and with a ruthless motion toppled it back. Trussed like a fowl, the Ancient One crashed helplessly to the floor. The force of the impact caused the breath to whistle between his teeth. His feet were now elevated. Sid laid hold on his worn brogans and tore them off. Nevada, meanwhile, took up the iron poker and inserted it in the bed of glowing coals on the hearth. "You'll sweat some more," said he, nodding. "Lest you remember where that roll is. You'll sweat plenty, Bodini." "Funny how these short-memoried fellows get action," said Sid, when their toes begin to curl up. The Ancient One, looking up like a crushed insect, fixed horrified eyes upon Rip. "I know you," he cried shrilly, his voice cracked and high. "You're Campbell. Rip Campbell. I've seen you once over to Lodgepole, a likely young man. You going to stand by and watch these savages torture me? You ain't, par you now." Campbell Rid's face, mask-like, grew pale. Moisture glistened on his forehead, but he said nothing. "You lady," cried the fallen one. "You got a sweet face. A kind, true face. You don't hold with these lads? You can't. Don't you let him harm me. I got a gal your age. She lives down to Humboldt Flats. She ain't so well fixed. Her man's homestead runs mostly to sand and rimrock. She's got 2 boys, twin boys. They'll be 3 years old come June. You know what I'm fixin' to do with the money I got from the sheep? Gwenny, that's my gal, wants me to come live with her. I'm old, she says, and them yearlin' lads want me, too. That their money is to help irrigate the homestead and schooling for the children. It'll take some of the load off in Gwenny's shoulders." The girl stilled his outcries with a gesture. "Well, Cowboy?" She looked Rip full in the face. "You asked for it. You insisted on it. Now you're getting a glimpse of it. Does this sort of thing live up to your expectations?" "That's enough," said Nevada. He spoke to the girl evenly, without heat, no funny remarks. "Remember what the chief said? It still goes. Sid, let's have the iron." "Wait," said Rip. "Never mind the iron." Sid straightened, scowling. Nevada shot a quick, keen look at Rip's face, and his hand dropped to his side. "What'd you mean?" demanded Sid. "I mean," said Rip, "that if you gorillas had an ounce of brains to go with your large ideas, you'd travel farther and faster. I've been watching this old rooster. You don't have to scorch his feet. His eyes have given him away. When you picked up that iron, he looked toward his whole card. Old son, the game's up. It's tough, but you gotta take it. Your loot's up on the shelf." He indicated a row of condiment cans and provisions on the wall above the stove. "What's it in?" "No, no," cried Bodini wildly. "It ain't in the shack. I buried it over on the hillside." "Which can?" Rip stepped toward the shelf, arm upraised. "In the sugar. This alleged baking powder, maybe." The fallen one said nothing.
Paralyzed.
Motionless, save for his staring eyes, he watched Rip take down the receptacles and explore their contents one by one. 3 square coffee cans stood in a row. All were 3/4 full. The first 2, emptied upon the table, yielded nothing. When the loose coffee was emptied from the third, a package was revealed, wrapped in coarse paper. "Ha! Pay dirt." He unwrapped it. A roll of bills was revealed. They were of large denomination, held by a rubber band. "Well, I'm damned," Sid chuckled aloud. Huge teeth bared. Even Nevada's frosty eye glittered. You called the turn. At that? Campbell, you're a wolf. Rip looked at Bodhi. The Ancient One had sagged, as though life's strength had drained from him. His gaze was fixed on Rip hopelessly, apathetically, and 2 large tears welled forth upon his bearded cheeks. Bah, said Rip. Let's go. This business gripes me. You said it, Sid. We're a pack of fearless wolves. But we got our meat, so what's the odds? Eh? He replaced the package in the can, swept the loose coffee upon it, and closed the lid. He did likewise with the other cans, scowling. Turn the critter loose, said he, harshly. What are we waiting for? Turn him loose, Naughton demurred. Sid will, leave him lay. If nobody calls on him for a couple of days, that's his hard luck. Who's carrying the loot? He demanded, indicating the can in Rip's hand. Joe, said Nevada. It's yours, lady, said Rip, extending the can to her. His eyes mocked her. The spoils of war. No, he admonished as she would have opened the receptacle. Best ease it in your saddlebag, as is. If there's any slip-up before you get back to the roost, it's just a jag of coffee, and what of it? Let's go, said Nevada. Listen, said R.I.P. You wildcats drag along. When you're started, I'll unshackle this old rooster and follow. No use to leave him here to die by inches. There's nothing to be gained. He can't do any harm. We're in the clear and on our way. Am I right? Nevada's careless vote carried the day. He's soft, said he to Sid. A couple more jobs and he won't be so finicky. Run along, he told Rip. I'll turn him loose. I'll leave his rifle empty. We don't want him taking pot shots at us for luck. The 3 spurred forth from the silent homestead. Navod followed some moments later. He and the girl pulled away without comment, mounting into the pinnacles. Sid grinned upon Rip in the shadow of the scrub pine. Nevada and Joe traveled together, said he. Chief's orders. Not more than 2 can ride in a herd outside of the gap. Rip, you done noble. You read that O.L. Coot's mind like a magician? Takes a green hand like you to show me in Nevada the fine points. The chief will be pleased. And just between the pair of us, Cowboy, he leered meaningly, you needed it. Up till now, you didn't rate with Albert no more than a busted straight. Maybe you could fill, and maybe you couldn't. Rip did not react to the obvious bid for confidential exchanges. He merely rode on in silence, his sombrero pulled low, his features dark and grim. It was after sundown when they rode through the blackness of the cleft. The lookout informed them, in answer to Sid's question, that Nevada and the girl had not yet returned. Albert was waiting in front of the bunkhouse. At his command, a youth lounging nearby led the horses away, and the outlaw chief fixed Sid with a hard, questioning look. He's a curly wolf, said Sid in high praise, jerking a thumb toward Rip. He sketched briefly the events of the day, enlarging upon the manner in which their new recruit had unerringly smelled out the hiding place of the treasure. Fine, approved Albert. You did well, Campbell. Complacence was in his bearing, the self-approval of a shrewd judge of men. Where's Nevada and Joe? But even as he spoke, noise strengthened in the cleft above. A moment later, the pair emerged, the girl in the lead. The latter's careless voice was plain. The weary horses picked their way slowly down the slope. You did well, Albert repeated, nodding. Grub's waiting at the cook shack. Again, Sid and Rip ate alone, and in silence. The former's prodigious appetite left no time for idle conversation. Rip sat, his back to the door. He ate without relish, despite the foodless day, listening to sounds emanating from the camp at his back. The girl's horse and Nevada's were led away. The voices of the tree and Nevada, Joe and Albert faded, toward the latter's cabin. They would be gone 3 minutes. Rip judged, perhaps 5. He pushed his plate away and motioned to the widow Grattan to pour him more coffee. Having drained the cup, he reached for the makings. Half turned toward the door, he rolled a cigarette and waited. Footsteps approached. Rip was holding his cigarette in his left hand. His right fell easily to the bench against which his gun holster pressed. He turned himself a little further about. It was an awkward position, yet he commanded the door. Not Albert's, but Nevada's slightly taller figure loomed on the threshold. His face was thin-lipped, his eyes piercing. He said nothing to Rip. He looked at him once, his glance flickering to his gun hand on the bench. To Sid, he said tersely, "The chief wants you, pronto." The latter rose up, growling. His profane muttering died when he met Nevada's gaze. Wiping his mouth with the back of a hairy hand, he strode out forthwith, and the pair disappeared into the night. Rip arose, then, and stretched himself, yawning. He hitched his gun belt a little higher and took up his sombrero. He did not go out the front door of the cook shack. Instead, he turned toward the kitchen. The widow Grattan eyed him in silence, and in silence he passed her, pushed through the back door, and mounted in methodical fashion up the starlit slope. There was a niche in the wall, with a flat ledge at its base. He seated himself upon this ledge, crossed his legs, and tossed his sombrero into the shadows behind him. His cigarette had gone out. He rolled another, lighted it behind cupped hands, and leaned back, his head resting on the unyielding rock. The girl came presently from the direction of Albert's headquarters, alone. She entered the cook shack, and from there mounted toward her cabin. She entered, closing the door. Rip did not see her emerge, his attention being fixed upon the camp. But some moments later, hearing someone approaching stealthily from his right, he peered around the abutting rock. She was close at hand, stealing along the wall. She placed her fingers on her lips as a signal for silence. A moment later, she was seated beside him in the shadow of the cleft. She was breathing heavily. Looking at her through the gloom, his face close to hers, he saw that her eyes were wide, her lips parted. "Rip," she said, and for the first time her voice was vibrant with human qualities. "What's it all about?" Rip shook his head. He inhaled deeply on his cigarette, then cast it down and ground it beneath his heel. "Run along," said he. "You've got your own life to live. Me, I'm done. Please believe me, Rip." She laid her hand on his arm. "I'm your friend. I must know. Albert ordered me to my cabin. The others are looking for you. The widow, bless her, told him you'd gone back to the bunkhouse, but they'll find us here in a moment. So talk fast." He strove to shake off her hand, but could not. At her touch, and the sympathy in her voice, it was as though all the forlorn heartache within him rose up like a vast tide. "Better run along," he repeated. "Why did you give me the wrong coffee can down at Bodine's? It fooled Sid. It fooled Nevada and me. You did it deliberately. But why?" Rip stared at her, then looked away. "I'll tell you why. It's because I'm a total loss. I'm not even an outlaw, holding up helpless citizens, stealing honest money. Tears in the eye of old men. For 40 years we let Bodini sweat and save and starve. Then we swoop in like buzzards. It isn't right. To blazes with you all." He buried his face in his hands. "Doggone, I don't amount to anything. I'm neither afoot nor horseback. I can't live straight. I can't play my hand as a crook. What's the answer? Listen, Art. Isn't there anything of promise left in the world for you? Anything at all? What about your girl, down in the valley?" "That's something else, again," said Rip bitterly. "I couldn't see it then. I see it now. Funny how you size up things at the finish, when it's too late. I don't love her. Never did." "No," she agreed, or wouldn't have given up hope. "She was on a kind of pedestal with me," he explained. Strangely, he felt no reticence at thus baring his innermost heart. "When she fell off, I thought the whole world crashed. I can see now that the world hadn't crashed at all. Nor her, either. She hadn't even been on the pedestal. I'd fallen in love with something that wasn't there, if you get what I mean." "I do," she nodded. "I understand. It was an ideal you held up in your heart. You thought she measured up. Her name was Cora. Old banker Hampion's daughter," said R.I.P. "She traveled with the moneyed crowd, educated in the East, and all that. It was just a spectacular cowboy. I amused her. Get that? Amused her. A lovesick sagebrush Ramil? No, I don't blame her. It's me that's to blame. But it's the facts that bite. I was anti-spectacular anymore when I got my own land and tried to work my own spread. It was when I lost everything and went running to her for sympathy, like a wall-eyed calf in a snowstorm, that I found out where I stood." And now he broke off abruptly, checking his bitterness, and fell silent. There was a guarded commotion in the camp below. Boisterous sounds in cabins and bunkhouses had ceased. Men talked in low voices. There was the creak of leather and the tramp of feet in the gloom. "Don't know why I'm telling you all this. What's it to you? And on the other hand, why not? Best run along, lady." But she did not run along. Looking at her closer, he saw, to his great amazement, that her eyes were luminous, as though filled with tears. "Rip," she said, "you and I are two babes in the woods." "That's me, all right," he agreed, "lost in an impenetrable forest. But you're sitting pretty. You've got your place in the scheme of things, such as it is. Slide down and tell Albert he doesn't have to come looking for me with his army. Tell him if he's as good as he says he is, to come up alone. And we'll draw together." "Why should I tell Albert anything?" "You're Albert's property," said Rip. "I'm no man's property." She bit her lip. "Is that who you meant last night, when I was questioning you, when you said a girl like you?" "This is no uplift society you're a member of," said Rip. "Those fellows debating down yonder on the best means to surround me, wouldn't he get honorable mention in a stalwart citizen contest? What do you claim to be?" "I'll prove what I am," she said. "When the time comes, the facts will speak for themselves." "When tomorrow, perhaps?" "Tomorrow," said Rip, grinning, "will be too late for me." Whatever difference that makes? The group at the foot of the slope, having finished their consultation, now mounted toward them. They did not scatter, but came in a body. Albert was in the lead. The others walked tensely, poised. The outlaw chief himself seemed calm and unconcerned. "Listen," said the girl swiftly. "You'll live until tomorrow. If you play your cards right, don't antagonize Albert. Let me do the talking. I know him through and through. I saved you the first time last night. I think I can do it again." "Why?" "Because you and I may be able to work together." "Rip," she whispered the word, her lips close to his ear to find our way out of the woods. They drew a little apart. Albert came to a halt before them, his head lowered and outthrust as he peered through the shadow. His killers spread out, forming a semicircle to left and right that hemmed him in. Rip stood up, the girl at his side. It was to the latter that Albert spoke. His voice was dry, casual. "I told you to go to your cabin and stay there. Joe, why are you here?" "For several reasons," she replied. "Name one," said Albert. "Make it good. Talk fast." "I'm partly responsible for this poker-faced recruit of yours," she said, her voice hard and matter-of-fact as of old. "I vouched for him when you were giving him the 3rd degree. I thought he would pan out. Down on the job today, he made monkeys out of the rest of us. I wanted to know why. I'm entitled to know. So I came up here to find out." Albert considered this, studying her. "HMEMA," said he at length, nodding. "Doing a little sleuthing on your own account, eh? For the good of the cause?" "No doubt." "Certainly," said the girl. "If you guerrillas had ganged up on him, he would have shot it out and never said a word. I used my own trusty methods. A little sympathy, and he almost wept on my shoulder. Broke right down and confessed. It was no mystery. After all, Albert T. didn't hold out the money. Believe it or not, he felt sorry for Bodini, couldn't bear to see him suffer. Tears in the eyes of stalwart men, and all that. So he acted on impulse and took the wrong can." Walbert continued to study her, saying nothing. "You, Sid," said the girl. "In Nevada. You were there. Did you see him squirm when Bodini was desperate?" "He sweated plenty," Sid admitted. "I couldn't figure what ailed him." "What's the answer, then?" Albert demanded of the girl. She shrugged her shoulders. "Use your own judgment," she replied. "Personally, I think he's cured. Stealing crusts from helpless citizens isn't the action he craved. When it comes to real business, he'll probably make good." "Well," said the outlaw, "the work's done, in any event. Run along now, Joe." He waved her curtly toward her cabin. She did not hesitate or revealed the slightest further interest. Without looking back, she strode in graceful fashion down the slope and so into the cabin. "Fellows," said Albert, addressing his cohorts, "this pilgrim has cost us heavy money. The pot's shy $3,000, due to his bleary-eyed play. Give it a name." They looked at each other uneasily. None broke the silence. "If Joe's right," Albert ruminated, "and he's cured, it may be cheap at the price. He comes from the valley. He knows his way around. He'll be mighty useful on the big job." "Chief?" questioned one of the group hesitantly. "When's this big job coming off?" It was obvious that none expected a direct reply to this daring query. It was not Albert's custom to reveal his plans until the hour was at hand. Yet the outlaw did not hesitate. "Tomorrow," he said. His cohorts stiffened. Delighted oaths escaped them. Instantly, it seemed, the very air was charged with suppressed excitement. "Hot dog," breathed Sid. "And what's the layout?" "That," said Albert, "will develop tomorrow. Meanwhile, what about Campbell?" "Speaking for myself," said Sid, "I don't give a doggone. What's the odds? He ain't gun-shy, that's sure. If he's over them sentimental heebie-jeebies, let him trail along. As far as that jackpot today is concerned, take it out of his share of the big winnings. From what you've told us, there'll be plenty." There were restless murmurs of assent. Already, the fate of their prisoner was dwarfed and lost in the prospect of the forthcoming campaign. "Oh, 'kay then," said Albert. "Drag along, fellows. I'll fetch Campbell down." The others hurried away, with the haste of those who bear heavy tidings. Albert walked slowly, motioning Rip in step at his side. He spoke confidentially. Beneath his pose, Rip sensed that the other was in the grip of furious rage. "That was a bad play, Rip. You're your father's son? He was always chicken-hearted like that. The men were plenty hostile when it developed that your foot had slipped. I've got to hold them in line and keep them satisfied. It's only the luck of fools that gives you another chance. Plus, Joe's efforts, the fellows would never have believed that you didn't appropriate the money for yourself. But the way we framed it made it plausible." "HMMM," said R.I.P. "You mean you sent her up to work on me?" "Naturally," said Albert. His voice was brittle. "You're not suggesting, Rip, old son, that you thought she came of her own accord for a confidential chat with you?" "I'm just that dumb," said Rip guardedly. "She's a good actress. She played her part like an old trouper. Tally up one more to experience." He shrugged his shoulders. What of it, Cowboy? Said Albert. I'll suggest this once again. Finally, in the game in which I've permitted you to take a hand, let there be no more falsicarding. Obey orders. Watch your step. Interest yourself in nothing but business. Savvy. Raise the ante. Then, Rip retorted, don't ask me to buck a 10-cent limit like this, Bodini deal. Let's see action. You'll see it, Albert promised dryly. Tomorrow. For riders entered the cleft at near midnight. Immediately thereafter the camp was astir. Lights sprang forth in the cabins down the line as Nevada, thin-lipped, moving like a shadow, told all hands to roll out and stand ready at the bunkhouse for orders from Albert. It was like a military alarm, a bugle call. Married members of the crew came on the run from the north end of camp, trailed by the wails of children roused from sleep. In a matter of minutes, the big room was crowded with armed men. With the exception of the 2 lookouts at the gap and the guard at the cleft, all were present or accounted for. In addition, were the 4 newcomers. These, strangers to Rip, were dusty and it developed that they were the outside men, Albert's spies, who had brought information from the valley. Albert came presently, striding like a conqueror. He was wearing 2 guns, hung low and strapped to his thighs. In some indefinable manner his slight limp had become a swagger. His pale blue eyes were alive with cold flame. His drooping mustache met his outthrust jaw. His 2 lieutenants, Sid and Nevada, were at his side. The outlaw chief stood before his band in the big room, thumbs hooked in his belt. As he looked from one to the other of the intent, impassive faces before him, the silence grew profound. His glance bored into Rip's in passing. It was the briefest of inspections. But in that instant, fleetingly, Rip glimpsed what he had carelessly suspected before, that the outlaw's former pretense of friendship had been the merest gesture. Not he, Rip, nor Sid, and Navadon or the girl herself, franked as more than pawns in a deeper design. Albert, emotionless and utterly ruthless, shrewdly molding his band to his will, stood alone. When he spoke, his words were brief and blunt, because he was able to view proceedings as, he had grown to look upon life as from a pinnacle apart. Rip was able to analyze the crafty manner in which Albert handled the moment to his ends. He suggested enough to add fuel to the raging fires of excitement about him, to heighten suspense, to promise rewards. But no more. Men, said he, the situation I've been waiting months for is ready. The hour has struck. Before another sun has set, the valley down below will split wide open. By this time tomorrow night, each of us will be miles away. Behind us, the biggest job ever pulled in the West will be history. And our saddlebags will be heavy winnings that will make previous jackpots look penny ante. These fellows, he indicated, the spies from the valley, have brought news that set my plans forward a day. I had intended to strike at sunset tomorrow. Instead, we must be there by sunup. We leave in an hour. Each man will saddle his horse, take his 6-gun and rifle and bandolier of extra ammunition. He will also take light trail equipment, according to his taste, bearing in mind that his horse must not be loaded too heavy for fast travel. He indicated a pair of youths nearby. You 2 saddle immediately and relieve the lookouts so that they, in turn, can make ready. You'll join the column when the rest of us ride out through the gap. You mean to say, Chief? A voice questioned, that we ain't leaving no guards behind us? We're leaving no guards, said Albert, because we're not coming back. This has been a secluded and restful hangout. Its usefulness is done. The featherbed part of the campaign is absolutely over. After tomorrow, each of us will be on the dodge. To the reckless members of the Cowboy crew, upon whom the discipline of camp life had palled, this statement added zest to the adventure. Certain of the older outlaws were uneasy and troubled. Chief, said one of these hesitantly, what about the women folks? And the kiddies? For the women and children, said Albert, there is food here in plenty. And shelter? They'll stay behind. Each of you will make your own plans with your families about where you will meet again. If you fail to meet again, if, by chance, some accident tomorrow will prevent you from seeing them for a long time, the authorities will take care of them. They'll be placed in homes, no doubt, provided for at public expense. He spoke with chill and ruthless humor. It's a part of the tariff we're accustomed to. Good citizens, as usual, must pay the bill. Hard-bitten youths guffawed loudly. The man who had spoken, and the group he represented, were silent and grim. Rip saw their inner torture, and knew that they had no choice. Not Albert himself, but the rocky trail they had chosen was here claiming its toll. Women who had kept faith through pitiless odds, children whose innocent minds had not yet grasped the reality of their surroundings, these were treasures that must be left behind. Got it? Said Albert. Let's go, came the answering roar. All hands in the saddle by midnight, said Albert. We'll ride out in 4s, 10 minutes apart. Bull Secord. He named the commander in charge of each platoon and instructed these leaders to foregather at his cabin. All right, fellows, Get going. At midnight, the first detachment rode forth from the cleft. 10 minutes later, the next group followed. Rip's quartet, including Nevada, the girl, and Albert himself, was the last to leave. The stars were low and brilliant at that hour, the shadows black. In silence, the bristling platoons mounted the slope, sparks trailing from cigarettes. Momentarily, before entering the cleft, each rider was in silhouette against the jeweled sky. And Rip, watching, saw that most of these rode on without a backward glance. One bulky giant flung an arm aloft. And far down the line, in a lighted doorway, a woman with a sleeping baby in arms returned a brief gesture of farewell. "For men must work and women must weep," quoted the girl carelessly. "Even in this noble life. Touching, what? No wisecracks, Joe." Albert's brittle voice came from the gloom at their right. "That goes for you, too, Campbell." Rip rode first through the cleft, followed by Nevada. Albert and the girl brought up the rear. There was no lookout now on the lofty perch, nor at the gap below. The rear guard, passing through, was the last of the band. Except for the women and children who had been left behind to shift for themselves, the notorious stronghold was deserted. At Nevada's gesture, Rip reined to the right, or south, threading the juniper-clad slopes beneath the mesa that led down to the valley floor. Albert and the girl were some 10 lengths behind. While the gap was still in view, Rip twisted in the saddle to look back. Nevada, mistaking his intent, spoke tersely. "You and I stay in front, Cowboy. Albert and Joe ride alone." But Rip contemplatively, with gloomy awe, was looking back as at a doorway deemed forever closed. He had spurred toward the grim rendezvous 2 days before, never dreaming, nor hoping, to penetrate beyond the gunmen at the gap. Having entered the stronghold, he had not thought to emerge, yet he still lived. Not thus, easily, it was plain, did inscrutable fate permit men to avoid the unsought privileges and responsibilities of life. In what lay ahead? In what sinister drama presently to unfold would he play an unwilling part? He did not know, nor care, he told himself somberly. He was merely riding down the current of a dark tide, unresistingly, apathetically. What did it matter to him, what the big job was, just so the action was lurid, and the end, swift. Yet certain troubling thoughts stirred in the deeps of him, like sleepers wrestling with disordered dreams. Borne on the breath of the night wind, sweeping up from the valley, was the scent of sage, of alfalfa, and new mown clover. From far away came the bawl of a calf lost from a slumbering herd. The lights of lodgepole glittered like a cluster of fallen stars against the horizon line. And from near at hand, on a dusty highway, the voice of a belated horseman was raised in joyous song concerning some distant region where men were men, and a river was called the Rio Grande. That horseman, Rip knew, had once been of his own kind, of a scheme of things known and dear to him. How often had he, too, ridden with the lights of lodgepole at his back, penniless, singing into the flaming dawn. The valley had once been his valley, with life's dusty trails beckoning fair and far. "Nevada," said he abruptly, "where are we heading for? What's it all about?" "Not now, Cowboy," said Nevada. "Albert names the play. Later." It was the only interchange between the pair for 4 hours. Albert and the girl talked together as they followed at a fast lope. Only once, when soft going abruptly deadened the sound of their progress, Rip caught a fragment of their conversation. It was Albert's brittle voice. "And that's final. You know me, Joe. I'll call all bluffs." They rode the stars from the sky, and so into the chill splendor of dawn. Daylight was growing rapidly when they approached a sleeping homestead from the rear. Rip knew the place and the owner. It was called the Lockhart Ranch, on the Lodgepole Placer Road. The present owner was a stolid and industrious citizen named Joel Price. "We'll wait here," Albert whispered when they had achieved the ancient orchard flanking the barn lot. "He's up there, Nevada, and see if Sid and Hondo have done their stuff. They've had plenty of time." All dismounted, and Nevada stole through the shadows toward the farmhouse. He was out of sight but a moment. He reappeared beside the woodshed, gesturing them forward. Without further attempt at caution or concealment, the outlaw strode forward, with Rip and the girl at his heels. Nevada led the way through the back door and so into the kitchen. Here, on the floor, trussed like fowls and gagged, were Price and his wife. The man's stolid face was pale and grim. The woman's eyes were half closed, her matronly features flushed. Breathing heavily, she was all but swooning with terror. Sid and Hondo leaned against the wall, puffing on complacent cigarettes. "It was a cinch, Chief," said Sid, chuckling. "We nailed him out at the cow stable. Then we snared the old girl when she was building the fire. It was no chore at all. Get him out of the way," Albert directed after a brief inspection of their bonds and gags. He jerked a thumb toward the bedroom of the primitive establishment. "Horse him in yonder." The The pair were unceremoniously bundled away and forgotten. All moved into the meagerly furnished living room, which was still gray with early shadows. Albert looked at his watch. He was apparently emotionless, as always. Yet Rip sensed that a crisis of some sort, in his mysterious plans, was at hand. The others sensed it, too. All stood immobile, awaiting his word. "All right, Nevada," he said at length. "Get out there and get set with your wire clippers. You, Sid, stand at the door. When I give the high sign, pass it on to Nevada. It's gotta be fast." He snapped his fingers like that. Nevada instantly stepped outside. Watching him through the window, Rip saw him running up the poplar-bordered lane toward the highway. Albert and Sid, standing in the doorway, also followed his every movement. Paralleling the road, borne on sentinel poles that merged into the horizon to north and south, was the telephone line connecting Lodgepole, the county seat, with the mining town of Placer, 16 miles distant. Immediately in front of the homestead, a rangy juniper tree had been used as a post stop. This tree Nevada climbed nimbly, assisted by the stumps of ancient branches. He perched on the crossarm, and for a moment was busied with his pliers. Then he flung an arm aloft. Albert tightened his belt and approached the ancient wall telephone. He stood for a space considering, his unwinking gaze fixed on the floor. Sid stood poised at the doorway, tense, stooped a little, his hand upraised. Nevada was likewise poised on his high perch, his face turned toward them. And now, Rip was given a new glimpse of the twisted genius, the crafty resources, that had enabled Albert to survive and flourish through 3 decades of lawlessness in the high country. Here was play-acting supreme. A difficult impersonation of differing types that might have taxed the ability of the most finished trooper. It also spoke volumes for the care with which he had prepared for the event, for it was Albert who took down the receiver, who vigorously rang the exchange at Placer. But to the listening ear, it was the voice of Joel Price, heavy, humorous, somewhat deliberate, that carried over the wire. "Hello? Hello, Placer. This is Price, at the Lockhart. I want to talk to Jim Connors, at Lodgepole, BAD Sheriff, Sure, get him out of bed. It ain't important, but who's PIing at Bozo's Keep? Let him get up when the taxpayers get up. This is haying time." And when the sheriff's sleepy voice croaked hollowly in the receiver, it was another personality, excitable, all but frenzied, that roared across the intervening miles. By closing his eyes, Rip could almost have taken oath that fiery and waspish Hard Rock Malloy, town marshal of Placer, was himself standing there in the room. "Jim!" bellowed Albert. "Great Judas! Jim, come a Ronnie. This is Hard Rock at Placer. All Haney's busted loose here this morning. Your blasted gunmen from the Pinnacles split the town wide open. Swooped in like buzzards, 20, 30, maybe 40 of 'em hand. Picked us to the bone. It's a shambles. It's ruin and desolation. Main street's littered with dead and dying. But we got the skunks cornered in a draw outside of town." "What?" "Yes, the whole kit and caboodle of 'em all, but a couple who cut out of the herd. Fetch your posse, rout out your vigilantes. Bring every man that can. Sling lead. Bring the whole town. We'll hold 'em till you come. Blast the blasted polecats, we got 'em where we want 'em. We'll wipe the slate clean." He motioned to Sid. The latter's upraised arm fell. The droning of the wire ceased. Albert turned to the girl, his pale eyes flaming with triumph. "We got 'em," he said. "It worked. The sheriff promised 200 men in 4 hours. The whole town's primed for slaughter. The skids are greased. The traps said." He broke off, as though checking a weak display, and looked at Ryep. The latter, through the window, saw that Nevada was descending rapidly. The telephone wire had not fallen. Nevada had secured it in such a manner that there was no visible evidence that it had been cut. "What's the play?" Rip asked. "A military trick, as old as time," said Albert. "Draw the deaf Campbell away. Then take the fort. You might as well know it now, Campbell. You'll soon be in the thick of it. That wire that Nevada has cut is the only trunk line up the valley. There'll be no communication between the 2 towns for hours. All the local fire-spitting heroes will burn up the dust to pleasure. It's a grandstand play they wouldn't miss. All these demon desperados caught in a hole, ready to be shot down like coyotes." Meanwhile, he spread his hands. "We'll take Lodgepole." "How do you men take Lodgepole?" "Like Grant took Richmond," said Albert. "Like the barbarians took Rome." Nevada rushed in, breathing heavily. The gaze of the outlaw chief and his right-hand man met for a brief, triumphant instant. In that instant, Rip glanced at the girl and encountered her wide eyes fixed upon him. She seemed calm, detached, aloof, but at the base of her softly molded neck, belying her disinterested pose, he could plainly see a hidden artery rapidly pulsing. They quit the flats without ceremony, bearing north under cover of the juniper slopes. The balance of the crew, Rip learned, were already in concealment on the outskirts of Lodgepole. As speedily as the stealthy route thither would permit, Albert was hurrying toward the rendezvous. Rip rode with Albert, according to the latter's blunt command. Behind came Sid and Hondo. It was only afterward that Rip grasped the significance of the fact that these two trailed them closely, riding wide apart. At the rear, Nevada followed with the girl. Faster and faster now. It seemed to Rip, the dark tide was carrying him on. The roar of the breakers, in a manner of speaking, was close at hand. He was at a loss to account for the fact that now, in spirit, he was hanging back. He thought he knew when Albert motioned them to a halt on a high ridge and pointed out across the valley. Far to the southwest, on roads paralleling the section lines that led in the general direction of Placer, were many funnels of dust. These trailed tiny horsemen, undulating, insect-like, toward the southwest. By twos and threes in larger groups they rode, an army on the march. "Fools," said Albert, "see them ride. Wild-eyed to get to the killing. There'll be dead horses lining their back trail when they get the news. Too late. You grandstanding bills, you'll pay, and pay plenty." His voice was less brittle, more snarling. The iron self-control of the man was slipping from him. In that moment, it was the marauding wolf, the predatory beast of prey that peered forth from his pale eyes. And in that moment, Rip knew that his heart was not in this thing to which he had put his hand. Men he knew and respected were riding yonder across the valley he loved. There, at his feet, less than 20 minutes' ride distant, was the town in which he had spent his boyhood, and whose ties held him still. What though he was unwanted? That life had cast him out. His responsibilities, in the final and ultimate showdown, were not with these men with whom he had joined in blind and savage mood, but against them to the end. It was a staggering realization. Under its impact he rode slumped in the saddle, his chin on his chest. He peered at the horseman beside him, blinking. It was not Albert, but Nevada, and that still-faced youth was regarding him intently. Rip roused as from a dream, becoming conscious of his surroundings. Sid and Hondo were some 3 lengths back. Behind came Albert and the girl. Nevada was setting pace and trail, skirting an outcropping of rimrock and scrub pine, whose western extremity bordered on the city limits of the range metropolis. "Cowboy," said he in conversational fashion, "we're almost there. The gang's waiting in the draw yonder. We'll be there in 5 minutes." From the corner of his mouth he added, "Grin, roll a cigarette. Ride easy. The chief's watching us." Nevada reined closer. "I'm for Albert," said he. "I'll double-cross no man." But the chief's overplayed his hand with the girl. "She's entitled to a break. If she wants to save your scalp, I'll do her the favor, and to blazes with the chief. You're only a side bet with him, anyway. Got the picture?" Rip had not grasped the picture, but he nodded and lighted his cigarette. "Me, and Sid, and Hondo," Nevada continued, "have orders from the chief to drop you on sight at the first funny move. Instead, I'll swing my horse across behind you," said Hondo. "Won't fire through me. Sink your spurs into your critter. 2 jumps, and you're in the scrub pine. Bust through, and keep traveling." Rip eyed him fixedly. "I mean now," said Nevada softly, "before we get to the gang yonder. After that, you're sunk." Rip puffed on his cigarette, digesting what he had heard. And he knew, as he rode in brilliant sunlight, through a familiar world whose every detail was vivid and sharply etched, that his nerves had never been more cool and poised, his brain more clear, than at this moment. "HMEMM," said he. "Those are hefty words, but we've got 5 minutes yet, walking slow. A few questions. Cowboy, will you answer me straight? If you'll pass your word that what I say dies with you," said Nevada. "You've got it," said Rip. "Shoot, then," said Nevada. Perspiration glistened on his mask-like face. "Any gent who could look into Albert S. rifle like you've done up yonder, grinning, like that, 'tis the real beef. But talk fast. What did you mean, then, when you said I was sunk, after we reached the gang?" "Because," said Nevada, "the chief hates the ground you walk on. When we leave this job, we leave you behind us. Toes up, so the citizens will think you led the wolves right back to the home folks." "Roost. HMEM," said Rip. It was as though a cold wind breathed upon his back. "How does he get that way?" "On 2 counts," said Nevada. "First, Joe's sweet on you. Secondly, and these are roots that strike deeper, he aided your father. Long chance, some old score, he wants to pay off. Your pa, so he tells me, would have sold his soul to raise you straight." "Show," said Rip, chilled anew. "That's first-class hating. Joe's father was poison to him. Also," said Nevada, "that's why she's here. Albert, don't look at her like me, or you. She's King Colton's daughter, and he'll make her pay plenty. What else? Cowboy, talk fast. If ever there was an unforgiven minute, it's now." "You mean," said Rip, "that she isn't riding with this outfit of her own free will?" "She was teaching up in the Coeur d'Alene," said Nevada, in some flea-bitten and windswept community. Albert wrote her a letter. It was a Pippin, claimed he was lonely and childless, that he had a housekeeper and a big ranch, that he looked on her as a daughter, the daughter of an old pal. Come, he invites, and make your home here. She came. Albert took her through the gap. That was going on 2 months ago. She's been there since. And made the best of a bad bargain? Questioned Rip. He held his breath for the reply. The answer, he knew suddenly, would point to crossroads ahead. You notice that Albert limps? Said Nevada. Joe plugged him. It taught him respect at least for her shooting ability. She's a crack shot and goes healed all the while. So she pretended to give up hope. She tells me. She told the chief she'd marry him after the big job. I promised to hide out with him up in the Horse Heaven country and start over. But he'd have to make a big stake first. She made that final. And it sounded reasonable to the chief. The only language he understood. You savvy, the only way for her to postpone a showdown. Doggone, Rip breathed. But look, Nevada, there's a hole in your story. She rode on the Peniente Bodini job with us. As one of Albert's aces. On that Bodini job, said Nevada, the chief figured to kill several birds with one stone. He missed 'em all by the width of one coffee can. It was the first time Joe had been outside the gap. It was your first job. Also, he wanted to brand you both. Bodini would scatter the word in the valley, you savvy, that the two of you were in the gang. But what was to prevent Joe and me from making a run for it? Nothing much, Nevada admitted, except me and Sid. We both rode all day with our hands on our artillery. There was also a half-dozen fellows, maybe a dozen, trailing along just for percentage. Son of a gun, said Rip. But if Joe knew Albert's plans all the while, why didn't she refuse to ride on the Bodini job? Why is she riding now? Because, said Nevada with a twisted smile, she placed her bets on you. Don't ask me how a gal figures things, but this is her slant. When she first saw you up yonder on the trail when you rode in among our guerrillas like a gent, riding to a feast, grinning like that, knowing you didn't have a Chinaman, chance she figured you were one of them answers to a maiden's prayer. What I mean, one of those knights in shining armor, right out of the storybook. She needed a gent with a good right arm to back her play, and here you were. So she put in a word for you with Albert Chadinette again. After the Bodini job, she was hoping to get to talk to you, to break down your hard-boiled ideas and persuade you to help her make a getaway. Rip cut in. Listen, last night, after the Bodini job, when I was sitting up there under the wall, waiting for the firing squad, did Albert send her up to talk to me? He did not, said Nevada with emphasis. The chief gave orders right at the start that she wasn't to talk to you. She saw her chance last night and took it. But Albert crossed her up. He took a good holt on the Widow Grattan's hair. After the third twist, when her scalp was about to come off, she told where you were. So Joe had to cut her parley short. She hoped to be able to work on you today. She hoped to the end. Now she's through. All she craves is that you have a chance. You're young. You're entitled to blaze your own trails. Over yonder, beyond the pinnacles, the fields are still green. Some bleary-eyed sentiment like that. Wow, Rip groaned. It was as though pent-up forces within him, newly released, rose up like a hot tide. What a noble, upstanding bonehead I turned out to be. Nevada, I'm the blindest Jasper that ever had a chance to square himself with the world. And the dumbest, said Nevada bluntly. Because look, Cowboy, you've crowded your luck too far. The 11th hour struck about a minute ago. Here comes Albert, and yonder's the gang. Massed in the junipers at the head of the draw were many mounted men. The gleam of metal was in the shadow, and many restless hoofs milling. Albert, leaving the girl with Hondo and Sid, was drawing up abreast. It's too late for a break now, said Nevada. You've talked yourself into a ticket across the river. Good hunting. Albert reined up beside them and shot a keen glance at each. Strange fires burned in his pale eyes. Rip glanced back, hoping to meet the girl's gaze, but she was riding between Sid and Hondo, head bowed. We're here, said Albert. In 15 minutes, history will be written. Fall back, Nevada. Overlook no bets. Campbell, you ride with me? In the sheltered draw, within rifle shot of the main street of Lodgepole, as Albert gave terse final orders for the attack. Rip learned for the first time the details of the big job. Its sheer daring made for its probable success. The stage had been made ready with clock-like precision, both in attack and in preparation for retreat. Albert had employed the strategy of a mastermind. As the trading center for many hundred square miles of range, Lodgepole boasted 3 banks. The largest was the First National, known generally as Hampton's. The resources of the Stockman's National ran a close second. Lastly was the Merchants and Miners State Bank, a small but robust institution catering to the vast mining operations above Placer. Because the community was remote from the great financial centers, all 3 were known to carry huge cash balances. The total in currency and gold in their combined vaults, Albert estimated, was in excess of $250,000. In one fell swoop, holding the defenseless Main Street in a state of siege until the banks were being raided, they would seize upon this enormous jackpot and depart with haste. The plan of attack was simple. It was now 9:15 when the bank's side doors, according to the easygoing custom of the range, would be open for business. The entire band, with the exception of 2 left in charge of the horses in the draw, would filter into Main Street as unobtrusively as possible, through back doors of saloons and pool halls, sauntering casually forth from alleys. 5 picked men, with a leader in command, would gather at each bank. The balance of the crew would take up their positions at points dominating the street. A gunshot would be the signal for the attack. The street would be cleared, and each bank raided simultaneously. The forces would converge upon Hampton's, where Albert would be in command, and retreat to the horses affected. A sinister detail emerged in the outlaw's final instructions to his crew. Cold-bloodedly, as always, Albert's reptilian nature showed its fangs. It was brought out, almost as a last word, that 2 cases of 60% dynamite had been smuggled into town by one of Albert's lieutenants. This high explosive, covered by an old horse blanket, was reposing in a weed-infested vacant lot adjacent to Hampton's dynamite. Questioned one of the men. "What for?" "Chief, I'll tell you what for," said Albert. "It's a little private grudge I've nursed for the past 25 years. Against this stuffed shirt, Hampton, he knifed me in the back once. Never mind how, but it's a long lane that never turns. Does he think I've forgotten? No, by the eternal. Cleaning out his vault isn't enough for me. When we're through, I'm going to blast his penny-ante bank into kingdom come. He laughed at me once. Let him laugh that off." Rip, who was standing beside him, spoke deliberately. He neither knew nor cared whether his words would precipitate a crisis. He had no plan, but his hate of the man and all that he stood for rose up within him like a red tide. "I know what that grudge is, Albert," said he. "Hampton was a young banker then. He persuaded a couple of ace-high young fellows to quit you and go straight. He lent them the money to back their play. Their names were Carruthers and Colton." He looked the outlaw full in the face. "Best forget your grudges, Albert." The outlaw whirled, like a striking rattler, his hand a claw above his gun. Rip faced him grinning, poised, their gaze locked and held. A moment thus. Then Albert, looking past him, shook his head in an all but imperceptible motion. Rip heard several weapons rasp into holsters behind him. "What's your play, Campbell?" The outlaw spoke softly, and in the same breath, as though sensing the danger of further debate, "Never mind. We'll discuss it later, after the job. Now then, men, got it straight. Take no chances, drop any armed citizen on sight. Shoot to kill. Protect the men carrying the gold at all costs. You all know where the relay horses are waiting? You know where we meet for the split? All right, you salty gents." The 2 blocks comprising the business section of Lodgepole at mid-forenoon were all but deserted. A few horses hitched to buckboards dozed at hitching rails at the distant courthouse square. Shirt-sleeved proprietors stood in doorways of their respective places of business, alert for latest news from the supposed battlefield at play. Those citizens still remaining after the general exodus toward the south were congregated in small groups, engaged in excited debate. 3 hours had elapsed since the telephoned message had burst upon the town like a bomb. It was as though the thundering hoofbeats of departing riders and their exultant yells still re-echoed down the sunlit street. Certain strangers joined these buzzing groups. They appeared unobtrusively, sauntering from adjacent alleys. They sidled into the outskirts of the crowd, attracting no attention. In palaces of refreshment along the street, cash customers appeared as from nowhere, leaned on the bar, and called carelessly for service. The ranks of pool hall loafers gained new recruits unnoticed. The town marshal, delivering his opinion on the placer battle from an up-tilted chair at the livery stable door, was flattered by the interest of 2 unrecognized persons who leaned against the post at his side, nodding in courteous agreement. Thus, in a matter of minutes, the stage was set. Hampton's Bank, pride of Lodgepole, was one of the town's 5 brick buildings. Its massive doorway was framed by huge marble pillars. On either side of this main entrance were 2 lesser doors, through which, prior to the official opening for business, customers passed into a small anteroom and so through swinging doors into the ornate lobby. Nevada and Hondo entered first. They were followed, a moment later, by Sid. Then came the girl, and lastly, Albert and Rip. Sid pushed through the inner swinging door and held it open for the girl. At the same moment, Albert, in the anteroom, motioned Rip back. "Outside, quick, Campbell," he spoke sibilantly, as through clenched teeth. Looking past him, Rip met the girl's eyes. They were like pools of shadow against the pallor of her face. She shook her head slightly. Her breast was rising and falling, 2 quick intakes of breath. She was standing with her hand thrust into the pocket of her leather jacket. Her pose was tense, her white teeth biting into her lip. And Rip knew then, at the desperate warning emanating from her, that he must not turn his back on Albert. "Want in, Joe?" he said. She shook her head again. Albert whirled upon her, turned back to glare at Rip. Women clerks beyond grilled counters were looking at them curiously. Nevada and Hondo were leaning against a high table, the former rolling a cigarette. Sid still stood, jaw set, holding the door open. "Go in then," muttered Albert thickly. Turning, he strode out into the street and halted. Rip and the girl passed through into the lobby. Sid stood watching Albert, and in that moment the girl whispered in Rip's ear, "Oh, Rip, you're through finished. Why didn't you go? There's no escape. Don't you want to live now?" "I do," said Rip. "I found plenty out too late, but I'm doing this much for you and the world. Joe, I'm taking Albert with me." Her face was immobile, her lips white. "Please," she whispered, "let me help. Tell me what to do. I'll stand by you." He shook his head. "No," he said, "it's just Albert and me. Stay in the clear." Further parley was cut short as Albert's weapon roared deafeningly in the street outside. Those in the bank stood motionless, frozen. The machine gun clatter of typewriters and adding machines ceased. Banker Hampton, emerging from the vault with a tray of currency in his hand, halted in his tracks, grizzled brows raised in surprise. Nevada's weapon leaped from its holster. His voice cut the silence like a knife. "Stay put, mister. Right where you are. Don't move." The banker stood statuesque, except for a lowering of his grizzled brows. A woman screamed simultaneously, both within and without the bank. Chaos descended upon Lodgepole. Gunfire crashed in the street outside, coming from scattered points. Loud yells strident oaths, shouted warnings. The beat of hurrying feet created a babble of sound. More distant explosions came, muffled as behind walls. Albert charged in through the swinging doors, guns in hand. He was a formidable and appalling figure, jaw outthrust, eyes gleaming. Sid, Hondo, and Nevada, grimly shoulder to shoulder, were holding the bank employees at bay. The women were huddled together like frightened quail. Two sallow-faced bookkeepers and a youthful teller stood pale and quaking. Rip was against the wall at the right, thumbs hooked in his belt. Opposite stood the girl, Joe, her hand thrust into the pocket of her leather jacket. Albert surveyed the scene with a lightning glance and instantly assumed command. He said nothing to Rip, gave him no orders, disregarded him utterly. He leaped across the lobby, pushed through a swinging gate that led behind the teller's cages, and faced Banker Hampton. Sid followed, and Hondo. Nevada turned himself about slowly. His eyes were turned on Rip. At that instant, as at a preconceived plan, 7 or 8 of Albert's shock troops rushed in from the street. The lobby was crowded with armed men. 3 of these joined Albert and his lieutenants. 2 posted themselves at the door. The others scattered to strategic points. "You, Hampton," said Albert. "Remember me, eh, Shorty DeVere?" The banker's grim face became more deeply lined. Albert dashed the tray of currency from his hand, pressed the muzzle of a weapon against his chest, and pushed him back. "Stand there," he directed. "Watch the parade go by. And sweat? I'm collecting heavy interest." "Hampton," he leaped back, keeping one weapon trained on the banker. With the other, he motioned toward the vault. Inside, he directed the trio beside him. "Drag out the loot. You, Sid and Hondo, herd the ladies out. These white-collared heroes. Also," his contemptuous gesture included the bookkeepers and the youthful teller. A new and brazen clamor arose above the din outside. Whether the 3 outlaws who had entered the vault had set off some hidden alarm, or one of the apparently terrified employees had pressed a button, could not be determined. But a ringing gong burst forth in a staccato, sustained note. It added a quickened tempo to the uproar and to taut nerves, like the beating of jungle drums. "That's Campbell yonder." Hampton, Albert gloated. "You know him, Rip Campbell. He showed us the way around. He's my right-hand man. His interest, too. Hampton, it was a haywire investment you made." "What?" Plain enough was the fact that not gold alone, but the slaking of vengeful thirsts of years, made these moments climactic for Albert, and it was as though his very malignancy, in his intoxication of triumph, turned invisible scales against him. For the grizzled banker, who had seen many dawns flame on the frontier, had also faced death long before. In his youth, he had pitted his resources against Albert. He did so now, though the attempt, on the face of it, was sheer deadman's. The 3 outlaws were approaching from the interior of the vault, laden with currency and sacks of gold. The banker was standing some 2 paces distant. Notwithstanding that Albert's weapon was trained upon his breast, that he stood alone in a room crowded with desperate men to whom human life meant nothing, he hurtled forward in a sudden, explosive effort. Albert's gun roared. Stricken in mid-leap, the banker's bulk carried him on. The polished steel door clanged shut. Falling, Hampton's clutching hand spun a numbered dial. He slumped upon the floor, head sagging. "Judas," breathed the voice. The vaults closed. Albert stood, crouching, his drooping mustache curved back in an animal-like leer of rage. For an instant, it appeared that he would send slug after slug crashing into the banker's inert body. Then he slid his weapons back into their holsters. He whirled upon Sid and Hondo, who had just returned from escorting the bank employees into the street. "Get the dynamite." His voice was thin and rasping. The pair charged forth. All about in the big room, men looked at each other unwinkingly. "Listen, Chief," said Nevada. "What's the play?" "There's 200,000 in there," grated Albert. "Understand? 200,000? This blasted citizen's passed out. Does he think he can checkmate me now? We'll split this vault like a sardine can. We'll blow the whole building to blazes and take the loot from the ruins. You trundle that safe over here. Upset it against the door." In the madness of the moment, all vestige of reason had forsaken the outlaw crew. They leaped to obey Albert's command. Only Nevada's voice was raised in protest. "Wait," he shouted. "You're loco, Chief. There's 3 of our fellows in there. 2 blazes with them," snarled Albert. "We've got no time for kid gloves. They took their chances on this job. So did you. So did I. They lost. That loot in there is more than half the jackpot. Right over here. Sid, easy. Hondo, that's dynamite. Ease 'em in between the safe and the door." "Now you wait," Nevada insisted, his voice strained to breaking. "I'm with you, Albert, but this is going too far. 2 of those fellows are family men. Take a vote on it." Vote nothing. Albert was all but foaming at the mouth. "Who made a plaster saint out of you, Nevada? You'd see your best friend boiled in oil for 1/10 that jackpot? We going to take chances with the noose and not get the loot? No, by the eternal." A roar of agreement, bestial, inhuman, drowned out Nevada. Albert tore aside the loose top of the upper box of explosive. Here was revealed a coiled fuse, already capped. He drew this forth in a long spiral, produced a match with shaking hand, and struck it upon the safe. "Outside, quick," he commanded hoarsely, waving the tiny flame aloft. "Get in the clear. It's a 40-second fuse. Once he blows, rush back and dig into the ruins." Rip, while all were intent upon the grim drama unfolding at the vault, had leaped the counter and approached from the right. He had had no plan of action a moment before. Now the way was plain. He wagered all on a single throw of the dice. "Stop!" His voice halted the general movement toward the door. All halted to look back. All stood transfixed. Rip stood opposite Albert, gun in hand. The weapon was not directed at Albert. Its muzzle was trained upon the 2 boxers, wherein immeasurable forces awaited release. And the clicking of the hammer, as he raised it with his thumb, was plain in the momentary silence. "Stay put, fellows. 1 slug in this dynamite and we're all reaching for a harp. Don't move, anybody. You know me, hombres. Even if you drilled me, I'd surely pull the trigger." He addressed the room, but his eyes were upon Albert. "Get in the clear, Joe. Travel, and keep going. Drop that match, Albert. If you feel lucky draw, no man living save Rip himself could have thus dominated the scene." There were outlaws of caliber in the room. All these, having seen Rip-faced Albert's rifle without a quiver of an eyelash, stood like frozen statue. Albert himself, whose courage was as emotionless as that of a reptile, made no move. The match burned and blackened, fell away from his fingers. "Get going, Joe," Rip urged. "Remember those green fields over yonder?" But the girl did not go. She stood, pale and poised, her hands gripping hard on the counter at her back. New turmoil arose outside. Running feet beat a loud tattoo. Gunfire from north and south came nearer and clearer. Answering shots roared forth from the threshold of the bank. Bursting through the doorway, their retreat covered by the shock troops converging from up and down the street, came the looters from the other banks. They were burdened with heavy bags of gold and currency. 3 wounded were all but dragged inside. "Let's go, Chief," roared one of the frenzied newcomers. "Things are getting too hot. An army of old-timers and loco kids are closing in. We have got to make a run for it." "Key down," counseled a shaken voice. "See Albert and Campbell. Buying that safe is enough dynamite to blow us clean across the Jordan. And Campbell is hog wild." There came to Rip, at that instant, a dazzling, an incredible possibility. Because 3 helpless men were entombed like rats in the vault, he had leaped in to hasten the inevitable showdown between himself and Albert. He had hoped, by using the dynamite as a threat, to forestall being dropped by a dozen bullets before closing with his archenemy. Now, with the lobby crowded with the entire Outlaw band, he glimpsed a daring coup. The delay had given the citizens time to assemble. If he could control the situation a few moments longer, until the bank entrance was guarded, there would be no escape. All would be entrapped behind barred windows and walls of stone. "You're bluffing," said Albert, licking his lips. "You couldn't do it." Joe would go, too. The fuse slipped from his hand. His fingers remained outspread. Rip saw grim purpose gathering in his eyes. "Never mind me, Rip." The girl's voice was trembling, but resolute. "I'm with you. Play it to the end." "Yes, Albert," said Rip, nodding. "It's just a bluff. You've seen me out on a limb before. The question is, are you going to call?" The plate glass of the main entrance crashed in before a vicious fusillade. The deaf Campbell at the door shrank back. All those in the lobby scattered to cover, vaulting behind marble counters, taking their stand behind soaring pillars. Only Albert and Rip stood fast. A bullet flattened on the safe between them, its fragments spattering wall and ceiling. "What do you want from us, Campbell?" came Nevada's hoarse voice. "Name it quick." From the tail of his eye, Rip saw banker Hampton struggle up to a sitting position, supported on his good arm. How long he had lain thus in pretended stupor could not be said. It was his voice, hard-bitten, matter-of-fact, that finally made reply. "Show's over, men. Give yourselves up peaceably. You haven't a Chinaman's chance. If you thought Rip was bluffing, what about those citizens out yonder? The safe protects the dynamite now, but what's going to happen when they fire through the windows? You, Shorty Albertuse your head. The game's up, raise your hands. Hurry, take his guns. One of you fellows. Rip, Rip." The girl's scream came piercingly, warningly too late. The slightest slackening of attention on Rip's part and Albert had struck. It was incredible that a human hand could move so fast. Rip had only to raise the muzzle of his gun with a flick of the wrist. Yet both weapons roared as one. Under an impact which was as though a flaming sword had pierced him through, Rip fell back and down. Albert pitched forward against the safe. He clung an instant, seeking vainly to raise up his weapon again. But even his undying hate could not give him sufficient strength. His head sagged, and he slumped slowly to the floor. The shocking power of the heavy bullet, tearing through Rip's right shoulder, had shut off light and life like the abrupt drawing of a curtain. Time and an awareness of things ceased. But deep within him, in those mysterious compartments of the human brain whose functions cease only with the last heartbeat, a species of momentum built up by his iron purpose carried him on and on. He had not seen Albert fall. So instant had been the halting of consciousness. He knew nothing of what followed. Thus, as he struggled up and up through a well of blackness, it was as though he still stood at the grim crossroads, calling upon all his resources of stamina and resolution to stand fast, to close his mind to all the belated promise of life, to play out his hand to the end at any cost. Again and again, in endless sequence, he faced Albert eye to eye, while between them crouched giant forces capable of shattering the massive building like a house of cards, of sending all within it reeling forth like wind-blown dust. Once more, to late heat read Albert's maniac purpose. The girl's scream re-echoed. He had failed. He was falling. He glimpsed a white-walled room and a white-jacketed figure bending over him. There was a window through which sunlight flooded, and beside it, in a recumbent position, in a wheelchair, which was a bulky person whose features blurred, merged into, and were lost in the engulfing darkness. Again, eons later, he opened his eyes, in time to see the white-coated doctor closing the door behind him. Immediately upon that official's departure, he at the window delved into the pocket of his bathrobe, and, with an appearance of great guilt, drew forth a huge black cigar. He lighted this, blew a blast of smoke through the open window, and peered owlishly at Rip. It was Hampton, the banker. "We've raised up a milk-fed generation," observed that hard-bitten old-timer, soft as putty. "I get a slug through my shoulder and think nothing of it." He waved his cigar, winced, and profanely shifted his swathed torso to a more comfortable position. At least, not much. He had drilled in the same manner, plus a rib or two, and maybe a punctured lung or some such triflan. What happens? 2 doctors for repairs and renovations, 5 nurses, and a barrel of ether to hold you down while they operate. 2 hours for you to snap out of it. Not so good, eh? He grinned, mouthing his cigar. "How's tricks, Rip?" But Rip did not reflect his genial mood. "Where's Albert gone to?" he asked weakly. "Albert," said the banker, "has gone to his reward. That's one job you did right, son. His shot was quick, but yours was straight." "Yes," he nodded complacently. "Shorty's gone, and for his own sake, I hope he doesn't meet up with your dad or King Colton over yonder. Where's Joe?" "Waiting for a chance to get at you, but I spoke first. The doc says I can chin with you 5 minutes. No more," he snorted. "What's the world coming to, when a little hefty conversation will put a pair like us down and out? Where's the gang?" in the who's they go, and what a roundup that was. The bullpens crowded, with their retreat cut off, and that dynamite ready to pop under their noses, they caved in a hurry. The fellows holding the horses in the draw were also nailed. Every man jack of Mr. Corral, except that lad, Nevada. When they were being marched down to the jail, he cut out of the herd and made a run for it, right in front of the courthouse. Leaped on a horse and started for the tall timber. Bullets whistled all around him. They might just as well have been horses. Some wild-eyed fellows undertook to run him down. But it seems they had a relay string cached out yonder, ready for a quick getaway. So he thumbed his nose in their faces and faded out of the picture. Just as well, said Rip. Nevada was the whitest man of the crew. Yeah, strength to his arm, Mr. Hampton. He licked his lips and strove to speak with resolution. But iron was no longer in him, and his voice trembled. I've got nothing to say for myself. But I want to put in a word for Joe. She wasn't in that crew of her own free will. She was kidnapped and forced to ride with them. That's enough, said the banker. You don't have to tell me anything. I've already got the picture. The girls told the story. To me and District Attorney Powell. Yeah, she's in the clear. As for you, he looked hard at Rip. Get hold of yourself and hang on. I've got a jolt to hand you that'll shake your eye teeth. You ready for it? You can't jolt me, stated R.I.P. apathetically. My eye teeth are anchored down. In the last couple of days, I've been everywhere and seen everything. You don't have to tell me I'm sunk, Mr. Hampton. Without a ripple. The whole world knows I joined up with this gang. And why? They know I did it deliberately. Sure they do, the banker agreed. Because that little girl, Joe, told me and District Attorney Powell all about it. And Powell told the world. It's already history. Get that, Rip. There's no use trying to alibi out of it now. Because you've waked up to find yourself famous, Rip. You're a cockeyed hero. What you mean? Rip whispered. Listen. The other's harsh features split in a sudden, wolfish grin. This exultant leer passed. He lowered his voice and spoke in confidential vein. You're a poker player, Rip. I've likewise been around a little. So has Powell. You may know certain things. I may suspect plenty. Powell may have a hunch. But you and I know, and Powell knows, that a good bluff is sometimes worth a royal flush. Powell's got the whole gang under lock and key. He'll send them up. That's all he's interested in. He's satisfied. The rain is rid of the dangerous crew of cutthroats that ever cluttered up a decent community. So the valley's satisfied. Now then, if the girl explains your part in it, which immediately becomes as plain as the nose on your face as soon as she explains it, who are you to buck the deal? It's just one of those things to which a man has got to bow his head. It's the white man's burden. Got the picture? No, said R.I.P. What did Joe explain? It's shockproof, said the banker. The facts speak for themselves. To natural ears, a young man, Rip Campbell, who folks figure has a wild strain in him. This burns up, said Rip Campbell. It gripes him. Here's a crew of cutthroats, roosting up in the pinnacles. The said cutthroats have thumbed their noses at the law and flourished and fattened so that the whole country's roused up. Now then, this Rip Campbell is desperate. He's tried to shoot square and build up a reputation for himself as a decent citizen. He's failed. He's a high-strung lad, proud as Lucifer, and he gets to brooding over it. There's several other little details, such as a banker's daughter, that aggravates the state he's in. How show the world that he's right and they're wrong? The answer hits him square between the eyes. Forthwith, without telling a soul of his intentions. While the rest of the valley is stewing and fretting and champing at the bit without getting anywhere, he saddles his horse, takes his guns, and rides up Dead Man's Trail. For what purpose? To play a lone hand. Just like the cards fell, as follows. He tells the leader of this nest of polecats that he craves to be an outlaw. In a way which would have given his own dad a new slant on what a long chance meant, he makes his bluff stick. He's taken into the gang. But he's under suspicion, you understand? The leader of the crew, who, as cold-blooded a snake as ever, struck without rattling, has his doubts. The result is that, from 1 to a half-dozen gunmen are riding herd on Campbell every second of the time, with orders to shoot to kill at the first suspicious move. Does this faze Campbell? Not at all. With his life not worth a plug nickel at any stage of the game, he lays his plans. He finds out that this lodgepole raid is coming up. Fine. He rides along. He doesn't know where he's going to head off this stampede, nor how. He's just waiting his chance. He's a gambler, as everybody knows. And somewhere along the line, his hunch tells him there'll come a break. And all this while, you understand, he doesn't know whether or not he'll reach Lodgepole alive. Riding into town, he's warned that the rattlesnake chief of those Apaches figures on leaving him on the job, toes up. Does he make a break for it while he still has a Chinaman's chance? No. He plays it to the end. The break comes in the bank, when a blamed fool of an old banker forgets how scared he is and slams the vault door shut. Albert goes crazy and piles dynamite against the door. He couldn't have blown in the vault, that easy. Any experienced safecracker would have told him that, but he'd have wrecked it, and the bank, too. That's where Campbell steps in, deliberately outbluffing a gent who didn't know what fear is and was loco besides. He held the fort long enough for what was left of the population of this easy and peaceable community to close in on the polecat's nest and cut off retreat. And that's that. The last touch to the picture, the final star in his haywire crown, was the fact that this hero Campbell played out his hand to the last card. It rounded out the deal with the kind of flourish that goes rolling down the halls of time. And if there's a buckaroo in the whole high country who wouldn't give his right arm to be in your shoes, he isn't among the herd that's milling down there on the street right now. If there's a backbiting and whispering citizen, whoever speaks out in his dreams and says that Rip Campbell is anything else than the squarest, whitest, and most upstanding lad west of the Mississippi, the unfortunate maverick's hide will be posted at the nearest crossroads, with the scalp and ears missing. At least, the banker concluded, fastidiously flicking the ash from his cigar on the windowsill. That's the way those nearsighted hero-worshipping shorthorns figure it. As for me, I'll just say this, seeing that we're all alone, and I've known you since you were a foal, and your father before youth, that when it comes to fellows who are positively reeking with luck, I'm backing Campbell. Rip relaxed upon his pillow, his eyes half closed, while the room circled majestically about him. He tried to think, to grasp the incredible and undreamed possibilities opened up by the other's words. But the effort, at first, was too great. Don't you get head up now, advised the banker in alarm. Get a hold of yourself, Rip. Doggone, my 5 minutes was up long ago. Where's that blasted bell? If you were to have a relapse now, there's a certain young lady who'd have my scalp. And that's another, he hesitated, puffing furiously. Few indeed were the occasions when Banker Hampton shrank from calling a spade a spade. Such an occasion was obviously upon him. Now he cleared his throat in a deep-chested growl and clenched his teeth upon his cigar. Rip, said he, this comes hard. Here it is, all in a bunch. I crowded you off your quarter over on Wolf Creek. On your account as much as Cora's. She's a fine girl, you understand? She asks my daughter Evan if her ma has weaned her away from the trails. I savvy and taught her to run with a high-hat crowd. But you'd never have been happy with her. You couldn't see it. I figured, maybe, that you'd live to thank me for it. Never dreamed it would send you up Dead Man's Trail. All right, said Rip. He grinned feebly. Doggone, that was years and years ago. Just wanted to say that the quarter's yours, said the banker hastily. Pay for it when you like. Take as long as you like. If you need more backing, it's waiting for you. Your credit's good. Well, it sounds like the gal is coming to trundle this baby carriage away. See you later, son. Just a second, pleaded Rip, rousing. Send up Joe, Mr. Hampton. Just for a couple of minutes. Ridiculous, scoffed the banker. Han't have you swooned plumb away? It isn't in the cards. Get a hold of yourself, Cowboy. Just you lay there in royal ease and count your blessings. You'll be lucky if you see her in a week. But his wolfish grin, as the nurse wheeled him away, all but linked his shaggy ears. And Rip relaxed, confident and content. He turned his head to face the window. Despite his utmost efforts, a pleasant lethargy enveloped him. He was not asleep, nor yet fully awake, and from that luxurious borderland of dreams, the girl did not attempt to call him back. Rather, in spirit, she joined him there. She closed the door softly and stole to his side. Her hand crept into his. No words were spoken to reaffirm the manner in which fate had linked their destinies together. No words were needed. In silence, they looked forth upon the smiling range where life's sunlit trails, threading green pastures, beckoned fair and far.